The cafeteria froze when an older white woman stormed in, snatched a 12-year-old black girl from a premium table, and twisted her arm like she owned the room. The tray hit the floor. Milk splashed. Laughter rose. The girl, Kiara Brooks, whispered that her father paid tuition too. The woman sneered, called her a quota kid, and shoved her toward the back corner where every black and brown student sat silent, small, invisible. And in the doorway, a man holding a brown paper lunch bag went completely still, watching his daughter crumble in public. What the woman didn't know, what the whole school was about to learn, was that the man she just humiliated wasn't just another parent. He was someone who could take the entire institution apart with one phone call. Stay with me until the very end and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. 6 hours earlier, Elliot Brooks had been drowning. Not in water, in meetings. In federal reports stacked like accusation towers across his mahogany desk in Washington, D.C. In grant proposals that read like ransom notes from school districts bleeding out in real time. In policy drafts written by people who hadn't seen the inside of a public school cafeteria since Reagan was in office. Elliot was the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Educational Equity at the U.S. Department of Education, a title so long it barely fit on his business cards, and so heavy it had cost him his marriage, most of his sleep, and nearly all of his relationship with his daughter. He'd spent the last 18 months trying to dismantle institutional segregation in American schools, the invisible kind, the kind that didn't announce itself with water fountains labeled colored, but achieved the same result through zip codes, discipline disparities, and funding formulas designed to fail. He was good at his job, exceptional even. He could read a school's data like a coroner reading cause of death. He knew which districts were warehousing Black and Latino kids in underfunded alternative programs. He knew which charter networks were counseling out students with disabilities to keep test scores high. He knew which affluent suburban districts were using gifted and talented programs as modern-day tracking systems, funneling white students into advanced courses while relegating everyone else to remedial oblivion. What he didn't know, what he had somehow inexcusably failed to see, was that his own daughter was living inside the exact system he claimed to be dismantling. The reminder appeared on his phone at 11:47 a.m., interrupting a conference call about Title IX compliance. Kiara's birthday lunch, today, 12:30 p.m. Elliot's stomach dropped. He'd forgotten. Again. Not the birthday itself. He'd sent flowers to the house that morning, arranged through his assistant because he'd been on a flight back from Sacramento at dawn. But the lunch, the tradition they'd started when Kiara was 7, back when his ex-wife Shanice was still willing to coordinate schedules, back when Kiara still believed her father's promises about next time and I'll be there. Elliot glanced at the clock. If he left now, right now, he could make it. Barely. He muted himself mid-sentence, grabbed his jacket, and told his stunned chief of staff he'd be unavailable for the rest of the day. She started to protest, mentioned the Senate briefing at 3, but Elliot was already gone, taking the stairs 2 at a time because the elevator felt like a cage. He stopped at the deli 3 blocks from Kiara's school, the one she used to drag him to every Saturday morning before everything fell apart, when she was small enough to sit on his shoulders and young enough to think he could fix anything. He ordered her favorite, turkey and avocado on sourdough, extra pickles, no tomato, with the kettle chips she liked that came in the little brown bag that crinkled loud enough to make librarians glare. The woman behind the counter smiled at him, the kind of smile that said she remembered him even though he hadn't been there in months. "Big day?" she asked, wrapping the sandwich in wax paper with the careful precision of someone who took pride in small things. "Her birthday," Elliot said, and the words tasted like an apology. "She's lucky," the woman said, handing him the bag. Elliot didn't correct her. Westbridge Academy sat on 18 acres of manicured green in Northern Virginia, the kind of private school that didn't advertise because it didn't need to. Its waiting list was 3 years long. Its endowment was older than most public universities. Its alumni included senators, CEOs, appellate judges, and at least one former cabinet secretary who still donated enough each year to keep his name on a library wing. Tuition was $42,000 annually, Before fees, before uniforms, before the suggested donations that weren't remotely optional if you wanted your child to be included in anything that mattered. Elliot paid it without blinking because Shanice had insisted during the divorce negotiations that Kiara deserved stability, deserved excellence, deserved a place where her intelligence would be recognized and cultivated instead of policed and suppressed. He'd agreed because he believed her, because he'd spent his career watching brilliant black children get funneled into systems designed to contain them, and he'd be damned if his own daughter would be one of them. He pulled into the visitor lot at 12:22 p.m., 8 minutes before lunch period started. The campus looked like something out of a brochure. Brick buildings with white columns, pathways shaded by old oaks, students in navy blazers moving between classes with the unhurried confidence of people who'd never doubted they belonged anywhere. Elliot checked in at the front office, signed the visitor log, clipped on a guest badge that felt like a surveillance device. The receptionist, a thin woman with reading glasses on a pearl chain, asked if he needed directions to the cafeteria. "I know where it is," Elliot said, though he didn't, not really. He'd only been here twice. Once, for Kiara's enrollment interview, once for a parent event he'd left early because of an emergency call from D.C. That probably could have waited. He followed the signs and the sound of teenage voices rising in that particular cafeteria frequency. Laughter and silverware and the low roar of 100 conversations happening at once. The cafeteria was massive, designed to accommodate the entire middle and upper school in staggered lunch shifts. Skylights poured natural light across rows of tables, and the far wall was all windows overlooking a courtyard with benches and a fountain that probably cost more than Elliot's first car. He stood in the doorway, scanning for Kiara, clutching the brown paper bag like a talisman. And then he saw it. At first, it didn't register as wrong, just different. A pattern his brain cataloged before his conscience caught up. The center of the cafeteria was bright, loud, full. Circular tables packed with students eating slowly, laughing, sprawled in their chairs like they owned the room. White students, almost exclusively. A few Asian kids mixed in. One or two others who might have been Latino but were light enough to pass, affluent enough to blend. The edges of the cafeteria were different, darker, quieter. Smaller tables pushed near the service line, near the loading dock doors, near the trash stations. The students there ate fast, heads down, voices low. They didn't sprawl. They didn't laugh. They took up as little space as possible. Every single one of them was black or brown. Elliot's breath caught. He'd seen this before, documented it, testified about it, written federal guidance condemning it. Cafeteria segregation. Invisible but absolute. Not enforced by law, but by 1,000 tiny social cues, by seating charts that didn't exist on paper, by staff who looked the other way while students learned exactly where they belonged. But he'd never seen his daughter inside it. Kiara sat at a corner table near the dish return, shoulders hunched, picking at a salad she clearly didn't want. Two other black girls sat with her eating in silence. None of them looked up. None of them took up more space than their trays required. Elliot's hands tightened on the lunch bag. He started to move toward her, then stopped, because he needed to see more. He stepped back into the hallway, positioning himself behind a pillar where he could watch without being seen, and pulled out his phone. He opened the camera app, switched to video, and started recording. For 5 minutes, he watched his daughter exist in a system designed to shrink her. He watched a white student brush past Kiara's table and knock her water bottle to the floor without apologizing, without even pausing. Kiara picked it up in silence. He watched a cafeteria monitor, a middle-aged white woman in a Westbridge polo, walk past the center tables with a smile, chatting with students, laughing at someone's joke. Then she reached the corner where Kiara sat, and her face changed. Neutral. Flat. She told one of the girls to tuck in her shirt. Told another to throw away her phone, told a boy at the next table to stop talking so loud, even though the center tables were 3 times louder. He watched Kiara shrink a little more with each interaction, her shoulders curving inward like she was trying to disappear. And then he watched something that made his blood turn to ice. A girl, white, blonde, probably 13, walked up to Kiara's table holding a full lunch tray. She looked at Kiara, looked at the empty seat beside her, and wrinkled her nose. "Is someone sitting here?" she asked, her voice sticky, sweet, and sharp at the same time. Kiara shook her head. The girl smiled. "Good," she said, and walked away, taking the seat at a center table instead. One of Kiara's friends whispered something. Kiara shook her head again, faster this time, and went back to her salad. Elliot's jaw locked. He kept recording. A few minutes later, a boy, tall, athletic, white, grabbed an extra chair from Kiara's table without asking, dragging it across the floor with a screech that made everyone turn. Kiara flinched. The boy didn't even look at her. The cafeteria monitor saw it happen. She was standing 10 feet away. She did nothing. Elliot zoomed in on her face, making sure the video captured her name tag, Mrs. Larchmont, cafeteria manager. Then the door beside the loading area opened and a man stepped out, tall, silver-haired, wearing a charcoal suit that screamed authority. The principal. Elliot recognized him from the website, Howard Kessler. Kessler walked slowly through the cafeteria, hands clasped behind his back like a general inspecting troops. He stopped at the center tables, chatted with students, patted a boy on the shoulder, laughed at something a girl said. He stood there for 3 full minutes, basking in the golden light center of his perfect school. Then he walked toward the corner where Kiara sat. He didn't stop, didn't smile, didn't speak. He glanced at the students there, a quick, assessing glance, the kind you'd give something you were checking off a list, and kept walking, disappearing through a side door without a word. Elliot's hand shook as he held the phone steady. He watched for 10 more minutes. He watched a white student spill juice on the floor near Kiara's table and leave it there. Watched the monitor make one of the black boys clean it up even though he hadn't spilled it. He watched another white girl ask to move tables twice and get permission both times. Watched a black student ask the same thing and get told, "You're fine where you are." He watched his daughter finish her salad in silence, throw away her trash, and walk out of the cafeteria without looking up, without talking to anyone, without taking up a single second more of space than she absolutely had to. And then Elliot turned off the camera, slipped his phone into his pocket, and stepped out from behind the pillar. He walked into the cafeteria holding Kiara's birthday lunch, like a man walking into a courtroom with evidence that would burn the whole building down. Kiara had just sat back down at her corner table, pulling out a book to read during the last 10 minutes of lunch, when she heard her father's voice. "Kiara." Her head snapped up. Elliot stood beside her table, still in his suit from the morning's meetings, holding a deli bag she recognized instantly. For one beautiful, terrible second, her face lit up. Pure joy. Unguarded. The kind of happiness she used to show him all the time before he started missing everything that mattered. Then she remembered where she was. Her eyes darted around the cafeteria. A few students were already staring. Whispers started to spread. "Dad?" she hissed, her voice low and urgent. "What are you doing here?" "I brought you lunch," Elliot said, setting the bag on the table. "Happy birthday, baby girl." Her throat tightened. She wanted to hug him. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted him to leave before anyone noticed, before this became another thing she'd have to explain, another reason she didn't belong. "You can't just show up," she whispered. "Why not?" Elliot asked, his voice calm but his eyes scanning the room, taking in everything she'd tried so hard to hide from him. "Because," Kiara's voice cracked, "because it's weird, okay? Parents don't just walk into the cafeteria." "I see plenty of parents here," Elliot said, nodding toward a table near the windows where a mother was having lunch with her daughter, both of them laughing over pasta from the premium salad bar. Kiara flinched. "That's different." "How?" She didn't answer, couldn't, because the answer was right there in the seating chart no one had written down, in the way her table was shoved near the trash cans, in the way the monitors only smiled at certain students, in the way she'd learned to make herself smaller every single day just to survive. Elliot pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Dad, don't... I'm having lunch with my daughter on her birthday," he said, unwrapping the sandwich and setting half in front of her. "That's all?" Kiara's hands trembled as she picked up the sandwich. She could feel eyes on them now, curious, amused, confused. She could hear the whispers starting to spread. "Who's that? Her dad? Why is he here?" And then, from somewhere behind her, "Is that even allowed?" Elliot heard it too. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed soft. "How's your day been?" he asked. "Fine," Kiara lied, the word automatic, rehearsed, the same thing she'd been telling him for months in texts and phone calls because it was easier than the truth. "Yeah?" Elliot said, taking a bite of his sandwich and watching her carefully. "Looks like a nice school." "It is." "You like it here?" Kiara's eyes burned. She nodded, staring at her sandwich, afraid that if she looked at him, she'd fall apart. "You have friends?" "Yeah." "Class is going okay?" "Yeah." "Kiara," Elliot said gently, and the kindness in his voice was unbearable. "Look at me." She couldn't. If she looked at him, she'd cry. If she cried, everyone would see. If everyone saw, it would be so much worse tomorrow. "Baby girl," he said again, and this time she did look up, and the moment their eyes met, she saw that he knew. He knew everything. She didn't know how, didn't know when, but she could see it in his face, the anger he was holding back, the guilt, the fury that wasn't directed at her, but at everything around her. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking, "please, just go." Before Elliot could respond, a shadow fell across their table. Mrs. Larchmont stood there, hands on her hips, her smile tight and professional and completely fake. "Excuse me," she said, her voice loud enough that half the cafeteria turned to look. "Can I help you with something?" Elliot looked up at her, his expression calm, his voice even. "I'm having lunch with my daughter." "I'm afraid outside food isn't permitted in the cafeteria," Mrs. Larchmont said, her eyes flicking to the deli bag with obvious disapproval. "Health code regulations." "I see students with outside food all over this room," Elliot said, nodding toward a group of girls sharing Starbucks drinks at a center table. Mrs. Larchmont's smile thinned. "Those are beverages. Different policy." "Interesting," Elliot said. "And what about him?" He pointed to a boy eating a sandwich that was clearly from the same deli Elliot had used. Same wax paper, same bag. Mrs. Larchmont's face flushed. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Visitors aren't allowed in the cafeteria during lunch periods without prior administrative approval." "I signed in at the front office," Elliot said. "For a scheduled meeting, I'm sure," Mrs. Larchmont said. "Not for cafeteria visits. If you'd like to have lunch with your daughter, you're welcome to arrange that through the proper channels." Kiara wanted to sink through the floor. Every eye in the cafeteria was on them now. Her friends had gone silent. The whispers were getting louder. "Dad, just go," she pleaded, her voice barely audible. Elliot didn't move. He looked at Mrs. Larchmont with the same calm, assessing gaze he used when reviewing compliance reports, the kind of look that made superintendents nervous. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mrs. Larchmont, cafeteria manager." She said it like a rank. "And you're enforcing a policy that appears to be applied selectively based on which students are involved." Mrs. Larchmont's eyes narrowed. "I don't appreciate your tone, sir." "I don't appreciate watching my daughter eat in a corner like she doesn't belong here," Elliot said, his voice still quiet but edged with steel now. The cafeteria went completely silent. Mrs. Larchmont's face turned red. "Your daughter is free to sit wherever she chooses." "Is she?" Elliot asked. He gestured toward the center tables. "So if she walked over there right now and sat down, that would be fine." "Of course," Mrs. Larchmont said. "Kiara," Elliot said, turning to his daughter. "Go ahead." Kiara's eyes went wide with horror. "Dad, no! Go sit at one of those tables," Elliot said gently. "Your choice. Anyone you want." "I don't want to," Kiara whispered, tears spilling over now, her worst nightmare unfolding in front of 100 witnesses. "Why not?" Elliot asked, his eyes never leaving Mrs. Larchmont's face. Kiara couldn't answer. Her throat had closed completely. Mrs. Larchmont's smile returned, sharp and triumphant. "See? She's perfectly happy where she is. Now I'm going to have to insist that you leave or I'll be forced to call security." "Call them," Elliot said. Mrs. Larchmont blinked. "Excuse me?" "Call security," Elliot repeated. "I'd like to speak with them. And with your principal." What was his name? Kessler. "Principal Kessler is very busy. I'm sure he'll make time," Elliot said. Mrs. Larchmont's hand went to the radio clipped to her belt. She was about to key it when another voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" Principal Kessler had appeared from wherever he'd disappeared to earlier, his expression concerned and professional, his presence commanding immediate attention. Mrs. Larchmont turned to him with obvious relief. "Mr. Kessler, this gentleman is refusing to leave the cafeteria. He's disrupting the lunch period and violating our visitor policies." Kessler looked at Elliot, then at Kiara, then at the deli bag on the table. His eyes moved across the cafeteria, taking in the audience, calculating. "Sir," he said, his voice measured and condescending in the way principals speak to parents they've already decided are unreasonable. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to my office so we can discuss this appropriately." "I'm having lunch with my daughter on her birthday," Elliot said. "I understand," Kessler said, "but this isn't the proper venue. If you'd like to arrange a lunch visit, we have protocols for that. For the safety and comfort of all our students, we can't have unauthorized adults in common areas during school hours." "Unauthorized," Elliot repeated. "I'm her father." "I understand that, Mr. Brooks," Elliot said. "Elliot Brooks." Kessler's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. A quick mental search, trying to place the name, coming up empty. "Mr. Brooks," Kessler continued, "I'm sure you want what's best for your daughter, and what's best right now is for you to come with me so we can have a calm, productive conversation about how to support her going forward." It was a trap disguised as an olive branch, and they both knew it. Elliot looked at Kiara. She was crying silently now, her whole body rigid with shame. He reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see this sooner." Then he stood, picked up the deli bag, and looked at Kessler. "Lead the way," he said. As they walked out of the cafeteria, Elliot heard the whispers explode behind them. Speculation, judgment, entertainment. He heard someone laugh. He didn't look back, but his phone was still recording in his pocket, and the video he'd taken earlier was already uploading to a secure server, and the list of phone calls he was about to make would crack this place open like a rotten egg. Kessler's office was exactly what Elliot expected: dark wood, leather chairs, plaques, and photos covering every wall. Diplomas from Princeton and Penn. Pictures of Kessler shaking hands with governors, senators, donors. A shelf full of awards with Westbridge's crest engraved in brass. Kessler sat behind his desk and folded his hands, his expression shifting from authoritative to sympathetic. "Mr. Brooks," he began, "I want you to know that we take every parent's concerns seriously. Westbridge prides itself on being a community where every student can thrive." Elliot said nothing. He sat perfectly still, his face unreadable. Kessler continued, "I understand that transitions can be difficult, especially for students who come from different educational backgrounds. We work very hard to support all our families, but sometimes there are adjustments that need to be made." "Adjustments," Elliot said. "Yes," Kessler said, cultural adjustments, social adjustments. Our students come from very high-achieving families, and the expectations here are rigorous. Sometimes students who aren't accustomed to that environment can feel out of place. It's not a reflection on them. It's simply a matter of fit." Elliot's eyes were flat, cold. "Are you suggesting my daughter doesn't fit here?" "Not at all," Kessler said quickly. "I'm simply saying that if Kiara is struggling socially, we have resources available. Counseling, peer mentorship programs, lunch groups designed to help students build connections." "Lunch groups," Elliot said. "Yes, small, structured opportunities for students with similar backgrounds to support each other." "Similar backgrounds," Elliot repeated. "You mean black students?" Kessler's smile faltered. "I mean students who might benefit from additional support during their transition to Westbridge's academic culture." Elliot leaned forward slightly. "How many black students are in Kiara's grade?" "I'd have to check the exact number." "Guess," Kessler hesitated. "Perhaps 8, 10? Out of how many total students?" "Approximately 120, Elliot nodded slowly. "And where do those 8 to 10 black students eat lunch?" "I'm sorry?" "In the cafeteria. Where do they sit?" Kessler's expression tightened. "Students are free to sit wherever they choose." "But they don't, do they?" Elliot said. They sit in the same corner, at the same tables every single day, away from the windows, away from the premium salad bar, near the trash cans and the loading dock. I'm not aware of any formal seating arrangements, okay? You walked through that cafeteria 20 minutes ago, Elliot said. You saw exactly where every student was sitting. You smiled at the kids in the center. You ignored the kids in the corner. You walked right past my daughter without saying a word. Kessler's jaw clenched. Mr. Brooks, I greet hundreds of students every day. I can't possibly. You can, Elliot said. You do. You just don't greet all of them the same way. The room went very quiet. Kessler's sympathy evaporated. His voice turned cold, formal. Mr. Brooks, I think we're getting off track. The reason you're here is because you violated our visitor policies and caused a disruption during the lunch period. If you have concerns about your daughter's experience at Westbridge, we can schedule a proper meeting to discuss them. But ambushing staff in front of students is not acceptable. Ambushing, Elliot said. I brought my daughter a sandwich on her birthday. You created a scene. Your cafeteria manager created a scene. I was sitting quietly. You refused to leave when asked. I asked her to explain why the policies she was enforcing only seemed to apply to me. Kessler's face flushed. Mr. Brooks, I'm trying to be patient here, but you're bordering on insubordination. Insubordination, Elliot said, and for the first time he smiled, a thin, humorless smile that didn't reach his eyes. That's an interesting word to use with a parent. You know what I mean, Kessler snapped. I do, Elliot said. You mean I'm not behaving the way you expect parents like me to behave? Grateful, compliant, afraid of rocking the boat because our kids are lucky to be here in the first place. Kessler stood abruptly. I think we're done here. We're not, Elliot said, not moving. But we will be soon. If you don't leave my office right now, I will call security and have you removed from campus, and I will seriously reconsider whether Westbridge is the right placement for your daughter going forward. There it was. The threat. The same one used on parents like him every single day. Step out of line, and your child pays the price. Elliot stood slowly. You should reconsider, he said, because after today, you're not going to have a choice. He walked out of the office, leaving Kessler standing there, confused and angry, and just beginning to realize that he'd made a very serious mistake. Elliot walked back through the hallways of Westbridge Academy, past classrooms full of students who had no idea what was coming, past walls covered in achievement banners and donor plaques, and smiling photos of a community that had decided long ago who belonged and who didn't. When he reached his car, he sat in the driver's seat and pulled out his phone. The video was still uploading, 93% complete. He opened his contacts and scrolled to a name he hadn't called in months. Marcus Webb, Chief Investigator, Office for Civil Rights, U.S. Department of Education. The phone rang twice. Elliot? Marcus's voice was surprised, warm. Man, it's been forever. How are you? I need you to open an investigation, Elliot said. Marcus's tone shifted instantly. Talk to me. Westbridge Academy, Northern Virginia, private school, federal funding through scholarship programs and grants, systemic segregation in common areas, selective discipline, deliberate marginalization of Black and Latino students, hostile environment, and retaliation against a parent who observed and documented it. Jesus, Marcus said. How solid is the documentation? Video, time-stamped, multiple incidents, clear patterns, staff, and administrative involvement. You witnessed this yourself? I witnessed my daughter living in it, Elliot said, and his voice finally cracked. Marcus was silent for a moment, then, send me everything. I'll have a team on site by Monday. I need it faster than that. Elliot, today, Marcus, I need people there today. That's not how this works. We have protocols, review processes. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Educational Equity, Elliot said. I'm telling you that a federally funded institution is operating an unconstitutional segregation system and retaliating against parents who challenge it. I'm invoking emergency authority under Title VI. Get a team there today, or I'm going over your head to the secretary herself. Marcus exhaled. You're serious? Completely. This is your daughter's school. I know. Elliot, if you do this, they're going to come after you. They're going to say you're abusing your position, that it's a personal vendetta. Let them, Elliot said. I've got video evidence that would make a civil rights lawyer weep. They can say whatever they want. I'm not wrong, and you know it. Another pause. Then, okay, give me 2 hours. I'll get a rapid response team mobilized, but you need to send me that video right now, and you need to write a formal complaint on the record. Already done, Elliot said. Check your email. He ended the call and immediately dialed another number. This one rang 4 times before someone picked up. Special Agent Diane Cortez, FBI. The voice was clipped, professional. Agent Cortez, this is Elliot Brooks, Department of Education. We met last year during the Title IX task force. I remember. What can I do for you, Mr. Brooks? I need to report a potential civil rights violation involving a federally funded educational institution. Pattern of discriminatory conduct, hostile environment, possible conspiracy to deprive students of their constitutional rights under color of institutional authority. That's usually OCR's jurisdiction. I've already contacted OCR, but if what I observed extends beyond administrative violations into criminal conduct, deliberate deprivation of rights, retaliation, intimidation, I want the Bureau aware from the beginning. You observed this personally? Yes. And I have video. Send it to me, Cortez said. I'll review it and determine whether federal criminal statutes apply. Thank you. Mr. Brooks, Cortez said, her voice softening slightly. Is your daughter safe? Elliot's throat tightened. For now. Keep her home Monday, Cortez said. If we move on this, the school's going to be a circus. Understood. He ended the call and sat in his car, staring at Westbridge's pristine brick facade, his hands shaking with adrenaline and rage and grief. His phone buzzed. A text from Shanice. Did you make it to Kiara's lunch? He typed back, yes. We need to talk. Tonight. Then he started the car and drove back to D.C., making 3 more calls on the way, to the department's press office, to his attorney, and to a contact at the Washington Post who owed him a favor from the last time he'd handed them a story about federal education funding being used to subsidize discrimination. By the time he reached his office, the first domino had already fallen. An OCR rapid response team was being assembled. The video had been reviewed and flagged for immediate action. And somewhere in Northern Virginia, Principal Howard Kessler was about to have the worst Monday of his life. By the time Kiara got home that Friday afternoon, she'd cried 3 separate times in 3 separate bathrooms, fielded 17 text messages asking what had happened in the cafeteria, and deleted her social media apps because she couldn't stand to see her name trending in the school's group chats with laughing emojis and speculation about whether her dad was crazy or just embarrassing. She walked through the front door of her mother's townhouse in Arlington, dropped her backpack on the floor, and found Shanice waiting in the living room with her arms crossed and her lawyer face on. The expression that meant someone was about to get cross-examined and there was no plea bargain available. Your father called me, Shanice said. Kiara's stomach dropped. Mom, sit down. Kiara sat on the couch, her hands knotted in her lap, staring at the floor like it might open up and swallow her. Shanice sat across from her in the armchair she'd inherited from Kiara's grandmother, the one she always sat in when they needed to have serious conversations about grades or curfews or the divorce, conversations where Shanice needed to be mom and lawyer and judge all at once. He told me what happened at lunch, Shanice said. He told me what he saw in that cafeteria, and then he asked me if I knew. Kiara's throat closed. Did I know? Shanice continued, her voice tight and controlled in the way it got when she was furious but refusing to yell. That my daughter has been eating lunch in a segregated corner for the past 4 months. Did I know that she's been getting treated like a second-class citizen at a school where I pay $42,000 a year? Did I know that she's been coming home and lying to me every single day when I ask how school is going? I wasn't lying, Kiara whispered. Then what do you call it? I just didn't want you to worry. Shanice leaned forward, her elbows on her knees, her eyes fierce. Baby, worrying is my job. Protecting you is my job. But I can't do that if you don't tell me what's happening. You were already stressed about work and the new case and... Stop, Shanice said, her voice cracking now. Don't you dare take care of me when you're the one who needs taking care of. That's not how this works. Kiara's eyes burned. I thought I could handle it. Handle what? Tell me everything, right now. So Kiara told her. She told her about the first day of school when she'd walked into the cafeteria and tried to sit at one of the center tables, and a girl had looked at her like she'd tracked mud on a white carpet and said, I think those seats are saved. She told her about the second day when she'd tried again, and a boy had actually laughed and said, You lost? She told her about the third day when she'd given up and found the corner table where all the other Black and Latino kids sat, and how none of them had even looked surprised to see her because they'd all gone through the exact same thing. She told her about Mrs. Larchmont, who smiled at white students and barked at everyone else, who let white kids leave trash on tables but wrote up Black kids for not pushing in their chairs, who enforced dress code violations that didn't exist in the handbook but somehow only applied to certain students, hoodies, head wraps, jewelry that was too ethnic, whatever that meant. She told her about the teachers who called on white students by name and Black students by pointing, about the history teacher who spent 3 weeks on the Revolutionary War and 20 minutes on slavery, and when Kiara raised her hand to ask a question, he'd said, Let's not get too political. About the guidance counselor who'd suggested she might be happier at a different kind of school when Kiara mentioned she was struggling to make friends. She told her about the bathroom where white girls fixed their makeup and took selfies, and the bathroom near the gym that didn't have mirrors anymore, because they'd been vandalized so many times that the administration just gave up replacing them, and how every Black girl knew which bathroom was which without anyone having to say it out loud. She told her about the Instagram account someone had made called Westbridge Confessions, where students posted anonymous gossip, and how half the posts about her called her a diversity admit or a scholarship case, even though her parents paid full tuition. About the boy who'd asked if her dad was a rapper. About the girl who'd touched her hair without asking and then wrinkled her nose and said, It's so rough. She told her about the school dance where she'd stood against the wall for an hour watching everyone else laugh and take pictures and slow dance to songs that made her chest ache with loneliness, and how she'd texted her dad asking him to pick her up early, and he'd sent back, Big meeting, ask your mom, so she'd called an Uber and cried the whole way home. She told her about the straight A's she was earning that somehow felt hollow, because she knew some of her classmates thought she only got them because teachers felt sorry for her. About the college counselor who'd steered her toward HBCUs without asking what she wanted. About the way she'd started dressing differently, talking differently, making herself smaller and quieter and less so that maybe, just maybe, she could disappear into the background and stop being a problem. And she told her about the birthday lunch she'd been looking forward to all week, her one bright spot in an ocean of gray, and how even that had been ruined because her father had finally shown up and seen the truth she'd worked so hard to hide. And now everything was going to get worse because he'd made a scene and embarrassed her and turned her into a spectacle in front of everyone. By the time she finished, she was sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe, and Shanice had moved to the couch and pulled her into a hug so tight it felt like the only thing keeping her from falling apart completely. I'm so sorry, Shanice whispered into her hair, her own voice breaking. I'm so sorry, baby. I should have seen it. I should have known. It's not your fault, Kiara choked out. Yes, it is, Shanice said. I picked this school. I fought for it in the divorce. I told your father you'd be better off here than at the public school near his place. I believed the brochures and the test scores and the college acceptance rates, and I didn't ask the right questions. I didn't look close enough. I didn't want you to know, Kiara said. I didn't want you to think I couldn't handle it. Shanice pulled back and looked at her daughter with tears streaming down her face. You shouldn't have to handle it. You're 12 years old. You should be worried about math tests and friend drama and what to wear to school, not whether you're allowed to exist in the same space as your classmates. What if Dad makes it worse? Kiara whispered. What if they kick me out? Shanice's jaw set in a way Kiara recognized, the way it looked right before she destroyed someone in court. They're not going to kick you out, she said, and if they try, they're going to have to go through me and your father and every civil rights attorney I know. But baby, I need you to understand something. This isn't about you. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't fail. This school failed you. These people failed you. And your father and I are going to make sure they answer for it. Everyone's going to hate me, Kiara said. Some people already do, and that's not your fault either, Shanice said. But you know what? There are probably other kids in that school who are just as miserable as you've been, who've been too scared to say anything, and when they see what happens next, they're going to know they're not alone. You're going to show them it's okay to fight back. I don't want to fight, Kiara said. I just want to go to school and not feel like garbage every day. I know, Shanice said, wiping Kiara's tears with her thumbs. And you're going to get that, I promise you. But first, we're going to burn this whole thing down. Kiara didn't know whether to feel terrified or relieved. She settled on both. Shanice stood and pulled out her phone. Pack a bag. You're staying with your dad this weekend. Mom, I need to make some calls, and I need to do it without you hearing me lose my mind on people who absolutely deserve it. Your father's expecting you in an hour. I don't want to see him, Kiara said quietly. Shanice knelt down in front of her. Yes, you do. You're mad at him, and you're scared, and you're embarrassed, and that's all okay. But he showed up today, baby. He finally showed up. And I know he's been missing too much and letting you down, but today he saw you and he saw what they were doing to you, and he's about to move heaven and earth to fix it. So you're going to go spend the weekend with him, and you're going to let him apologize, and you're going to tell him everything you just told me, and together we're all going to figure out how to make this right. Kiara nodded, too exhausted to argue. An hour later, Elliot picked her up in front of Shanice's townhouse, and the drive back to his apartment in D.C. was the quietest 40 minutes of Kiara's life. Neither of them spoke. Elliot kept glancing over at her like he wanted to say something but didn't know where to start. Kiara stared out the window and tried not to think about Monday, when she'd have to walk back into Westbridge and face everyone who'd seen her father get kicked out of the cafeteria. When they got to his apartment, Elliot ordered Thai food, her favorite, the kind with extra peanut sauce, and they sat on his couch eating in silence while a documentary about ocean life played on the TV, neither of them really watching it. Finally, Elliot set down his fork and turned to face her. I need to tell you something, he said. Kiara braced herself. I called some people today, he continued. People I work with at the Department of Education. Investigators. Civil rights attorneys. And I gave them everything I saw in that cafeteria. Video, documentation, testimony. By Monday morning, there's going to be a federal team on your school's campus conducting a full investigation into whether Westbridge is violating Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Kiara's stomach twisted. Dad, I know you're scared, Elliot said. I know you think this is going to make things worse, but baby girl, it can't get worse than what I saw today. It can't get worse than you sitting in that corner thinking you deserve to be there. Everyone's going to know it was because of me, Kiara said. No, Elliot said firmly. It's because of them. Because they built a system designed to make you feel exactly the way you're feeling right now. Small, invisible, grateful just to be tolerated. And I let it happen because I was too busy trying to fix other people's schools to pay attention to my own daughters. His voice broke on the last word, and Kiara saw tears in his eyes, the first time she'd seen her father cry since the divorce. I'm so sorry, he said. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I didn't see it. I'm sorry I believed you when you said you were fine because it was easier than admitting I'd failed you. But I see it now, and I'm not going to look away, and I'm not going to let them get away with it. Kiara felt something crack open in her chest, months of anger and loneliness and fear all pouring out at once. I needed you, she whispered. I texted you and called you and tried to tell you without actually telling you, and you were always too busy. I know, Elliot said. You picked work over me every single time. I know. You weren't there for the dance, or the science fair, or the math competition, or my birthday dinner last year, or the day I got my braces, or when I got sick and Mom had to leave work early to pick me up because you were in Sacramento. I know, Elliot said again, his voice wrecked. I know, baby. And I can't take any of that back. I can't undo the meetings I chose over you, or the trips I didn't cancel, or the phone calls I didn't return. But I'm here now. I'm here, and I'm not leaving, and I'm going to make sure that school understands what they did to you. Kiara wiped her eyes. What if they expel me? They won't. What if they do? Then we'll sue them into the ground and find you a school that actually deserves you, Elliot said. But Kiara, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? She wanted to. She wanted to believe that her father could fix this the way he supposedly fixed broken education systems for a living. But she'd trusted him before, trusted that he'd be there, that he'd call her back, that he'd show up, and he'd let her down so many times she'd lost count. "I don't know," she said honestly. Elliot nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer and knew he deserved it. "Okay," he said, "then just watch. You don't have to trust me yet. Just watch what happens next and decide for yourself." That night, Kiara lay awake in the guest bedroom of her father's apartment, the room he'd decorated for her after the divorce with furniture she'd picked out, and posters she'd chosen and stuffed animals from when she was little that she was too old for now but couldn't bear to get rid of. She scrolled through her silenced phone and watched her classmates dissect her life in group chats she wasn't part of, but that people kept screenshotting and sending to her anyway. Did you see her dad totally lost it in the cafeteria? So embarrassing. I would literally die. I heard he got banned from campus. Kiara's probably getting expelled. My mom said the school doesn't tolerate that kind of behavior. What behavior? He just brought her lunch. Yeah, but he confronted Mrs. Larchmont in front of everyone. So aggressive. He didn't seem aggressive to me. He seemed mad. Same thing. Is it though? Kiara turned off her phone and stared at the ceiling, wondering if there was any version of Monday where she didn't become the most talked about person at Westbridge for all the wrong reasons. She didn't sleep much. Neither did Elliot, who spent most of the night on his laptop in the living room, drafting formal complaints and reviewing federal statutes and making lists of every civil rights violation he'd witnessed, his anger transforming into the kind of cold, methodical fury that toppled institutions. And neither did Shanice, who called 8 different attorneys before midnight and had a strategy session planned for Sunday afternoon that would make Westbridge's Board of Trustees very, very nervous. By Saturday morning, the machinery was already in motion. Marcus Webb had assembled a rapid response team from the Office for Civil Rights, 4 investigators with expertise in education discrimination cases, 2 compliance officers, and a senior attorney who'd spent 15 years prosecuting Title VI violations and had a reputation for not accepting bullshit excuses from administrators who claimed they didn't know their schools were operating like it was 1955. They reviewed Elliot's video 3 times, cross-referenced it with Westbridge's own diversity reports and discipline data, pulled federal funding records, and compiled a preliminary findings memo that was damning enough to make Marcus call Elliot personally on Saturday afternoon. "You weren't exaggerating," Marcus said without preamble. "This is bad, Elliot. Consent decree bad. We're going to find things in their files that make this look subtle bad." "How fast can you move?" Elliot asked. "We're going in Monday morning, 8 a.m. No advance notice. We'll secure the records, interview staff and students, and conduct a full campus assessment. If what you documented is part of a pattern, and I think it is, we'll have enough for an emergency enforcement action by end of day." "What about retaliation?" Elliot asked. "They threatened to review my daughter's enrollment." "Document everything," Marcus said. "Every email, every call, every conversation. If they so much as look at her sideways after this investigation starts, we'll add it to the complaint and they'll regret it for the rest of their professional lives." "Good," Elliot said. "Elliot," Marcus said, his voice softening. "How's Kiara?" Elliot looked toward the guest bedroom where his daughter had been hiding all morning, avoiding him, avoiding her phone, avoiding everything. "She's scared," he said. "She thinks I made it worse." "Did you?" "I don't know yet," Elliot admitted, "but it couldn't stay the way it was." "No," Marcus agreed. "It couldn't." That same Saturday afternoon, Principal Howard Kessler sat in his home office in McLean, sipping scotch that cost more than most people's car payments, and reviewing the email he'd drafted to Westbridge's Board of Trustees. The email detailed Friday's incident involving an aggressive and uncooperative parent who had disrupted the educational environment and created a hostile situation in the cafeteria. It recommended that the school consider whether the current placement remains appropriate for the student in question, and suggested that families who cannot respect our community standards may be better served elsewhere. It was a masterpiece of passive voice deflection, written in the careful language of private school administrators who'd learned long ago how to make the victim sound like the problem. He'd spent 30 years perfecting this particular skill, The ability to frame legitimate complaints as parental hysteria, to recast discrimination as cultural differences, to position himself as the reasonable adult in the room while painting anyone who challenged him as unreasonable, emotional, threatening. It had worked beautifully for 3 decades. Parents who got too pushy found their children suddenly struggling academically. Parents who made noise found themselves excluded from committees and volunteer opportunities. Parents who threatened legal action found their contracts non-renewed with polite regrets about fit and mutual best interest. The system was elegant, invisible, bulletproof. Or so he thought. He hit send on the email and poured himself another scotch, confident that by Monday afternoon the Brooks family would be someone else's problem. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Sunday morning, Shanice Brooks walked into a conference room at her law firm with 8 colleagues, 2 boxes of evidence, and a litigation strategy that would turn his Monday into a nightmare he'd remember for the rest of his life. The meeting lasted 4 hours. By the time it ended, Shanice had a 50-page draft complaint alleging violations of Title VI, Title IX, the Equal Protection Clause, and Virginia's state anti-discrimination statutes. She had affidavits from 3 other black families whose children attended Westbridge and who'd experienced identical patterns of segregation, selective discipline, and social exclusion. She had financial records showing that Westbridge received over $2 million annually in federal funding through scholarship programs and grants, making them subject to federal oversight despite their private status. And she had a plan. If the OCR investigation found what Elliot believed it would find, Shanice would file a class action lawsuit on behalf of every student of color who'd attended Westbridge in the past decade. She'd demand compensatory damages, injunctive relief, court-monitored reform, and the removal of every administrator who'd enabled the system. If Westbridge tried to retaliate against Kiara, Shanice would add punitive damages and personal liability claims that would follow Kessler and his staff into retirement. And if they tried to settle quietly, she'd refuse and take it to trial, because some fights weren't about money. They were about making sure the whole world saw exactly what had been hiding behind the ivy-covered walls and the glossy brochures. One of her colleagues, a senior partner who'd won 3 landmark civil rights cases, looked at her across the conference table with something like awe. "You're going to destroy them," he said. "Yes," Shanice said. "I am." Sunday night, Kiara sat with her father on his apartment balcony, wrapped in a blanket, watching the lights of D.C. flicker in the distance. "Mom's scary when she's mad," Kiara said quietly. Elliot laughed, the first real laugh she'd heard from him all weekend. "Your mother is terrifying under the best circumstances. When she's mad, she's apocalyptic." "Is she mad at me?" "God, no," Elliot said. "She's mad at herself for not seeing it sooner, and she's mad at me for the same reason. And she's absolutely furious at your school for thinking they could treat you that way and get away with it." Kiara was quiet for a moment. Then, "What happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow, some very serious people are going to walk into Westbridge and ask some very hard questions," Elliot said. "They're going to look at records and talk to students and review policies, and they're going to find out whether what I saw on Friday was an isolated incident or part of something bigger." "You already know it's bigger," Kiara said. "I do," Elliot admitted. "But they need to prove it. That's how this works. We document everything. We follow the process, and we build a case so airtight that there's no way for them to wiggle out of it." "And then what?" "Then they have to fix it," Elliot said. "Or they lose their funding, or they get sued, or both." "Will I have to go back there?" Kiara asked, her voice very small. Elliot looked at his daughter, this brilliant, brave, beautiful kid who'd been carrying weight no child should have to carry, who'd been trying so hard to be strong that she'd nearly disappeared. "Not if you don't want to," he said. "If you want to transfer, we'll find you the best school in the district and make it happen. But if you want to stay and watch them fix what they broke, we'll make sure you're protected every step of the way. It's your choice, baby girl. Whatever you decide, your mom and I will back you up." Kiara thought about the corner table where she'd spent 4 months making herself small. She thought about Mrs. Larchmont's fake smile and Principal Kessler's deliberate blindness and all the students who'd learned to ignore her like she was furniture. She thought about the other Black and Latino kids who sat in that corner with her, who'd never said anything because they didn't think anyone would listen. And she thought about what her mother had said. You're going to show them it's okay to fight back. I want to stay, she said. Elliot's eyebrows rose. You sure? No, Kiara said honestly, but I don't want them to think they won. I don't want them to make me disappear. Elliot pulled her close, kissed the top of her head, and felt something shift in his chest. Pride mixed with heartbreak, hope tangled up with rage. Okay, he said. Then we fight. That night, Kiara finally slept, exhausted but no longer alone in what she'd been carrying. And the next morning, at exactly 8 a.m., 4 black SUVs pulled into Westbridge Academy's circular driveway, and a team of federal investigators walked through the front doors with badges, legal authority, and a very long list of questions that nobody at Westbridge was prepared to answer. The reckoning had begun. The receptionist at Westbridge Academy's front desk looked up from her computer Monday morning expecting the usual parade of late students and forgotten lunch deliveries. Instead, she found herself staring at 4 people in dark suits holding federal identification badges and briefcases that looked heavy enough to contain entire filing cabinets. Good morning, the woman in front said, her voice pleasant but carved from granite. I'm Senior Investigator Patricia Moreno with the U.S. Department of Education, Office for Civil Rights. We're here to conduct an on-site compliance review. I need you to contact Principal Kessler immediately and inform him that his full cooperation is required under federal law. The receptionist's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. I'm sorry, do you have an appointment? We don't need one, Moreno said, placing a document on the desk. This is our legal authority. We'll need access to all administrative offices, personnel files, student records, and disciplinary documentation. We'll also need a private room to conduct interviews with staff and students. You have 5 minutes to locate Principal Kessler before I start making calls that he really doesn't want me to make. The receptionist grabbed her phone with shaking hands. 3 minutes later, Howard Kessler came striding down the hallway in his Monday morning power suit, his expression somewhere between confused and irritated, still mentally calculating whether this was about funding paperwork or some random audit he'd forgotten to schedule. Then he saw Patricia Moreno, and his face went the color of old snow. He knew her. Everyone in private education knew her. She was the investigator who'd shut down 2 elite prep schools in Connecticut last year for running scholarship programs that were federal funding fronts for white enrollment maintenance. She was the one who'd forced a prestigious academy in Boston to sign a consent decree so restrictive it had basically put the school under federal receivership. She didn't do routine compliance checks. She did executions. Principal Kessler, Moreno said, extending her hand with the kind of smile that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. We need to talk. Now. Kessler shook her hand on autopilot, his brain already racing through worst-case scenarios and coming up empty because he genuinely had no idea what had triggered this. Of course, he said, his voice carefully modulated to sound cooperative while his mind screamed warnings. Is there some kind of paperwork issue? I'm sure we can clear up any confusion. This isn't about paperwork, Moreno said. This is about credible allegations that Westbridge Academy is operating in violation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by maintaining racially segregated facilities, engaging in discriminatory discipline practices, and creating a hostile educational environment for students of color. We're here to investigate those allegations, and we're starting immediately. Kessler felt the floor tilt beneath him. I'm sorry, what? Who alleged? That's not relevant to your cooperation, Moreno said. What is relevant is that you provide my team with immediate access to the following items. She handed him a typed list 3 pages long. All student enrollment records for the past 5 years. All disciplinary records disaggregated by race. All cafeteria policies and procedures. All staff training materials related to equity and inclusion. All complaint logs from parents and students. All email correspondence involving the terms diversity, discipline, seating, or behavioral issues. We'll need this by noon. That's impossible, Kessler sputtered. We need time to compile. You have until noon, Moreno repeated. My colleagues will be conducting a walkthrough of your facilities starting in 10 minutes. We'll be observing classes, common areas, and student interactions. You're welcome to accompany us or designate a staff member, but you cannot interfere with our observations or prompt students or staff on how to respond to our questions. Any attempt to obstruct this investigation will be documented and reported. Do you understand? Kessler's throat had gone dry. I need to call our attorney. You're welcome to do that, Moreno said. But the investigation proceeds whether your attorney is present or not. We're not here to negotiate. We're here to observe, document, and determine compliance. If you'd like your attorney present for interviews, that's fine, but it won't stop us from doing our job. She turned to her team. Let's start with the cafeteria. Kessler stood frozen in the hallway, watching them walk away like a demolition crew heading toward a building he'd spent 30 years constructing, and for the first time in his career, he felt genuinely afraid. By the time the first period bell rang, every teacher at Westbridge had received an emergency email from Kessler's office with the subject line, Federal Visitors on Campus, and instructions that were both vague and terrifying. Cooperate fully. Answer all questions honestly. Do not discuss the investigation with students or each other. Continue normal operations. The email had the frantic energy of someone trying to sound calm while the building burned down around them. In the cafeteria, Moreno's team didn't just observe. They measured, they photographed, they counted seats, documented lighting levels, noted the distance between the premium salad bar and the corner tables, recorded which tables had access to charging stations and which didn't. One investigator stood in the exact spot where Kiara had sat on Friday and took a panoramic video showing the stark contrast between the bright, spacious center of the room and the dim, cramped corners where students of color had been relegated. Another investigator reviewed the cafeteria's seating chart, the one that supposedly didn't exist, but that Mrs. Larchmont kept in a binder behind her desk for organizational purposes. The chart didn't explicitly assign students by race, but it did note which tables were reserved for athletic teams and which were general seating, and when cross-referenced with the school's enrollment data, the pattern was unmistakable. Every table marked reserved was 95% white. Every table marked general seating was 70% Black and Latino. Mrs. Larchmont watched this happen with increasing panic, her face cycling through denial, indignation, and finally a pale, sweaty terror as she realized that the system she'd maintained for years, the one she'd been told was just tradition and school culture, was being documented as federal civil rights violations. This is just how students choose to sit, she told the investigator reviewing the chart, her voice shaking. We don't assign seats. They sit where they want. The investigator looked at her with the flat, unimpressed expression of someone who'd heard this exact excuse in 17 other schools and had data proving it was garbage. We'll be interviewing students this afternoon, the investigator said. We'll ask them about their seating choices and whether they've ever felt pressured, discouraged, or prevented from sitting in certain areas. If their answers contradict your statement, that will be documented. Mrs. Larchmont's hands twisted together. I need to speak with Principal Kessler. He's currently meeting with Senior Investigator Moreno, the investigator said without looking up. You'll have your opportunity to provide a formal statement later today. Until then, please continue your normal duties and do not discuss this investigation with other staff members. Mrs. Larchmont fled to the staff bathroom and locked herself in a stall, her heart hammering so hard she thought she might vomit. Meanwhile, Kiara sat in her first period English class trying to focus on a discussion of To Kill a Mockingbird, the irony of which was not lost on her, while her classmates whispered and passed notes about the federal agents walking through the hallways with clipboards and cameras. The rumors were already spreading faster than actual information. The school was being shut down. The principal was being arrested. Someone had reported the school for fraud. Someone's parents were suing. The theories got wilder with each retelling, but none of them mentioned Kiara, and she was desperately grateful for that. Until third period, when she walked into the bathroom and found 3 white girls from her grade standing by the sinks, and one of them turned and looked at her with eyes full of accusation. This is because of you, isn't it? The girl said. Her name was Madison, and she'd been one of the ones who'd laughed when Kiara's father got escorted out on Friday. Kiara froze. I don't know what you're talking about. The federal people, Madison said. They're here because your dad freaked out in the cafeteria and made a huge deal out of nothing. It wasn't nothing, Kiara said quietly. Oh my God, yes it was, Madison said, her voice rising. So you had to sit at a different table. Big deal. You're so dramatic. One of the other girls touched Madison's arm. Maybe we should just… No, Madison snapped. I'm so sick of this. My mom said this whole thing is going to ruin the school's reputation. Colleges are going to think we're racist or something, and it's going to hurt everyone's applications, all because she couldn't just deal with normal school stuff like everyone else. Kiara's hands clenched into fists. 4 months of swallowing words rose up in her throat like a flood. Normal school stuff? You mean being treated like I don't belong here? Getting shoved out of seats? Having teachers ignore me? Eating lunch in a corner because you and everyone like you made it very clear I wasn't welcome anywhere else? Nobody made you sit there, Madison said. You chose to. You told me the seats were saved, Kiara said, her voice shaking now. First day of school, I tried to sit at your table, and you looked at me like I was trash and said those seats were saved. You made me feel like I was doing something wrong just by existing in the same room as you. Madison's face flushed. That's not what happened. Yes, it is, Kiara said, and you know it. Everyone knows it. They just pretend they don't because it's easier than admitting what this place actually is. What's that supposed to mean? Madison demanded. It means this school is fine with black kids being here as long as we stay quiet and grateful and invisible, Kiara said, and she was crying now, but she didn't care anymore. It means you get to have your fancy salad bar and your reserved tables and your perfect little world, and we get the corners and the leftovers and the constant reminder that we're only here because you're tolerating us. And when someone finally notices and says something, you act like we're the problem. The bathroom door opened and a teacher walked in, Ms. Chen, the history teacher who'd spent 20 minutes on slavery. She took in the scene with sharp eyes. Is everything okay here? She asked. Fine, Madison said quickly, grabbing her bag and pushing past Kiara toward the door. Her friends followed, leaving Kiara standing there with tears streaming down her face, and Ms. Chen watching her with an expression that might have been sympathy or might have been calculation. Do you need to go to the counselor's office? Ms. Chen asked. No, Kiara said, wiping her eyes with shaking hands. I'm fine. Kiara, Ms. Chen said, her voice gentler now. I know there are some people on campus today asking questions. If anyone tries to interview you without your parents' permission, you can say no. You have that right. Kiara looked at her, trying to figure out if this was genuine concern or a warning disguised as advice. Okay, she said. Miss Chen hesitated, like she wanted to say something else, then seemed to think better of it, and left. Kiara stood alone in the bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror that the white girls got to use while the black girls had a bathroom with no mirrors at all, and she thought about what her father had said. Watch what happens next. She was watching, and so far, what was happening felt like being torn apart in slow motion. By lunch, the entire school knew something massive was happening, but the details were still fuzzy. What wasn't fuzzy was the presence of federal investigators standing in the cafeteria with tablets and cameras, documenting every single interaction. Kiara walked in with her stomach in knots, her eyes automatically going to her usual corner table where the other Black and Latino students were already gathering like always, their movements automatic after months of conditioning. But today was different. Today, one of the investigators, a black woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense suit, was standing right next to that corner table with a tablet, watching students file in and choose their seats. Kiara saw the moment the investigator's eyes landed on her, saw her make a note on the tablet, saw her watch as Kiara started to head toward the corner, then hesitated, her feet stopping like they'd hit an invisible wall. Because suddenly Kiara realized what this looked like. Her choosing that corner. Her walking directly to the segregated section without prompting. To anyone who didn't know the full story, it would look exactly like what Mrs. Larchmont had claimed. Students sitting where they wanted. The investigator approached her gently. Hi there, I'm Ms. Washington with the Department of Education. Can I ask you a question? Kiara nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Is that where you usually sit? Ms. Washington asked, nodding toward the corner table. Yes, Kiara whispered. Why do you sit there? Kiara's eyes filled with tears again. She was so tired of crying, so tired of feeling like everything was her fault, so tired of carrying weight that shouldn't have been hers in the first place. Because that's where I'm supposed to sit, she said. Ms. Washington's expression softened. Says who? Everyone, Kiara said. No one says it out loud, but everyone knows. That's where kids like me sit. Kids like you, Ms. Washington repeated quietly. What does that mean? Black kids, Kiara said. Brown kids. The kids who don't fit in the rest of the school. Have you ever tried to sit somewhere else? Yes, Kiara said. The first week. And the second week. And then I stopped trying because it was too hard. Miss Washington made another note. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled at Kiara, a real smile that reached her eyes and made her look less like an investigator and more like someone's aunt who gave good advice and better hugs. Thank you for your honesty, she said. That took courage. It doesn't feel like courage, Kiara said. It feels like I'm making everything worse. You're not, Ms. Washington said firmly. You're making everything visible. That's different. That's important. And I know it's hard, but I need you to trust that what's happening right now is necessary. Kiara wanted to believe her. She wanted to trust that the federal investigators would fix what was broken and protect the students who'd been hurt. But she'd spent 4 months learning that the adults at Westbridge couldn't be trusted, and it was hard to switch that off just because different adults showed up with badges. Can I ask you something? Kiara said. Of course. Are you going to make them change? Like, actually change, not just pretend to change? Ms. Washington looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, We're going to document everything we find, every pattern, every policy, every practice that violates federal law. And then we're going to give this school a choice, fix it under our supervision or lose every dollar of federal funding they receive, which means they'll fix it. Because institutions like this don't give up money. They give up discrimination first. What if they just hide it better? Kiara asked. Then we come back, Ms. Washington said. And we keep coming back until it actually changes. That's our job. That's why we're here. Kiara nodded, blinking back tears. Now, Ms. Washington said, her voice lighter, where do you actually want to sit today? Kiara looked around the cafeteria. The center tables were full of students watching her conversation with the investigator, their faces ranging from curious to hostile to carefully neutral. The corner table was waiting, familiar and safe and utterly suffocating. I don't know, Kiara admitted. That's okay, Ms. Washington said. You don't have to decide today, but I want you to remember something. You belong here, not in the corner, not in the margins. Here, in this school that your family pays for, in these spaces that you have every right to occupy. And if anyone tells you different, you tell them to talk to me. She handed Kiara a business card with federal government letterhead and contact information. Kiara took it with trembling hands and walked to the corner table anyway, because choosing differently felt like too much, too fast, too visible. But this time, when she sat down, she didn't feel quite as small. While Kiara was navigating lunch, Principal Kessler was in his office with his attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Richard Carver, who specialized in defending private schools from discrimination complaints, and who looked increasingly concerned as Patricia Moreno laid out the preliminary findings. We've documented systematic segregation in your cafeteria, your bathrooms, and your extracurricular programming, Moreno said, reading from her tablet without emotion. We found evidence of racially disparate discipline in your records. Black students are 3 times more likely to receive suspension for the same infractions that result in warnings for white students. We've identified tracking patterns in your academic placement that funnel students of color away from advanced courses, despite qualifying test scores. And we've collected testimony from multiple students describing a hostile racial climate that your administration has not only failed to address, but has actively enabled. Carver cleared his throat. These are serious allegations that require serious evidence. Correlation doesn't imply causation. We have video evidence, Moreno interrupted. We have documentation. We have pattern data spanning 5 years. We have student testimony that corroborates everything we've observed. This isn't correlation. This is systematic discrimination dressed up as school culture. Kessler's hands were shaking. We have diversity initiatives. We have inclusion training. We have a non-discrimination policy clearly stated in our handbook, which you don't enforce, Moreno said. Policies without implementation are just public relations. We've reviewed your complaint logs. In the past 3 years, you've received 18 formal complaints from families of color about discriminatory treatment. You resolved 0 of them in favor of the complainant. You dismissed 6 as misunderstandings. You blamed 4 on cultural adjustment challenges. You suggested 3 families would be happier elsewhere. And you never, not once, conducted a formal investigation into any of the allegations. Those complaints were investigated, Kessler protested. By whom? Moreno asked. By our administrative team. The same administrative team being accused of discrimination? Kessler opened his mouth and closed it again. Carver jumped in. What exactly is the department proposing here? That depends on Principal Kessler's cooperation, Moreno said. If Westbridge enters into a voluntary compliance agreement, we can work together to implement necessary reforms under our monitoring. If Westbridge chooses to contest our findings, we'll initiate formal enforcement proceedings, which will be public, lengthy, and expensive. Either way, the discrimination stops. The only question is how painful the process is going to be. What kind of reforms are we talking about? Carver asked. Moreno pulled out a preliminary proposal that made Kessler's stomach drop. Complete revision of discipline policies with mandatory bias training for all staff. Elimination of all discriminatory practices in student services and common areas. Regular climate surveys with transparent reporting. Third-party monitoring for a minimum of 3 years. Public reporting of disaggregated data on discipline, academic placement, and student outcomes. And a formal apology to affected families with compensation for documented harm. This is absurd, Kessler said. You're asking us to completely restructure how we operate based on a few isolated incidents? Isolated? Moreno said, her voice sharp for the first time. Principal Kessler, we've been here for 6 hours. In that time, we've observed ongoing segregation, documented multiple violations, and interviewed students who describe daily experiences of marginalization that they've been reporting for years. Your cafeteria manager maintains a seating chart that creates de facto racial separation. Your staff applies dress code policies selectively based on race. Your guidance counselors steer students of color away from advanced placement courses. This isn't isolated. This is institutional. We're a private school, Kessler said desperately. We have the right to set our own standards. Not when you accept federal funding, Moreno said. The moment you took that first scholarship grant, the moment you participated in federal lunch programs, the moment you accepted Title I funds for support services, you subjected yourself to federal civil rights law. You don't get to cash federal checks and then claim you're exempt from federal accountability. Carver put a hand on Kessler's arm before he could respond. We'll need time to review these proposals and consult with the board. You have 48 hours, Moreno said. After that, we proceed with formal enforcement whether you're ready or not. She stood, gathered her materials, and walked out, leaving Kessler and his attorney sitting in heavy silence. How bad is this? Kessler finally asked. Carver's expression was grim. Very bad. If they have half the evidence they claim to have, fighting them will cost millions in legal fees and destroy your reputation even if you win, which you won't. So what do we do? You cooperate, Carver said. You sign their agreement, you implement their reforms, you fire anyone who can't get with the program, and you pray that the board doesn't decide you're too much of a liability and force you out anyway. Kessler felt 30 years of carefully built authority crumbling beneath him. This is because of that parent, the one who caused the scene on Friday. He did this. Probably, Carver said. But that doesn't matter now. What matters is that he was right, and you gave him ammunition by threatening his daughter's enrollment instead of taking his concerns seriously. I didn't know who he was, Kessler said weakly. That, Carver said, is the smallest part of your problem. By the end of the day, the investigators had interviewed 40 students, 12 teachers, and 8 staff members. They'd photographed every common area in the school. They'd reviewed 5 years of enrollment and discipline data. They documented patterns that would take months to fully analyze, but that already painted a picture so clear it didn't require interpretation. Westbridge Academy had spent years operating a segregated system disguised as private school excellence, and now the entire structure was being pulled apart by people who had both the authority and the determination to see it through. That evening, Elliot picked up Kiara from Shanice's house and found her quieter than usual, more withdrawn. "How was school?" he asked as they drove toward his apartment. Weird, Kiara said. Everyone was staring at me. The federal people were everywhere. And Madison Turner told me I'm ruining the school. Elliot's jaw tightened. Did you tell anyone what she said? No, Kiara said. I just left. I didn't want to make it worse. Baby, it's not your job to protect them from consequences they earned, Elliot said gently. If students are retaliating against you, that needs to be documented. I don't want to be the girl who reports everyone, Kiara said. You're not, Elliot said. You're the girl who told the truth when no one else would. There's a difference. Kiara stared out the window. One of the investigators talked to me at lunch. She was nice. She asked where I usually sit and why. What did you tell her? The truth, Kiara said. That I sit in the corner because that's where I'm supposed to sit. That I tried sitting other places and it didn't work. That everyone knows where kids like me belong. Elliot's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What did she say? She said I was making things visible, Kiara said. She said that was important, and she gave me her card and told me I belong here, not just in the corners. Do you believe her? Kiara thought about it. I don't know yet, but I want to. That's enough for now, Elliot said. You don't have to believe everything all at once. Just keep watching, keep telling the truth, and let your mom and me handle the rest. That night, while Kiara did homework at his kitchen table, Elliot received a call from Marcus Webb. We've got enough for enforcement, Marcus said without preamble. Pattern evidence, statistical disparities, documented retaliation, the whole 9 yards. Moreno gave them 48 hours to agree to voluntary compliance. If they don't, we go public with formal charges. What are the chances they agree? Elliot asked. High, Marcus said. Their attorney knows they're screwed if this goes to litigation. The question is whether the board overrules him and tries to fight anyway because they're more worried about reputation than reality. Either way, they lose, Elliot said. Yeah, Marcus agreed. They just get to choose how loud the loss is. Elliot looked at his daughter, bent over her math homework, still carrying weight she shouldn't have to carry, but finally not carrying it alone. Make it loud, he said. Make it so loud that every other school like this hears it and knows what happens when they think they can get away with this. Already planning on it, Marcus said. But Elliot, you need to prepare Kiara. When this goes public, and it will, there's going to be media attention. There's going to be backlash. Some families are going to blame her. Some students are going to make her life hell. I know, Elliot said. Is she ready for that? Elliot watched his daughter solve an equation, her face scrunched in concentration, still so young and already so much braver than she should have to be. She's getting there, he said. And we'll be right beside her the whole way. Tuesday morning arrived like a storm nobody at Westbridge was prepared for. The Washington Post hit newsstands and inboxes at 6 a.m. with a headline that made coffee spray across breakfast tables all over Northern Virginia. Elite private school under federal investigation for systematic racial segregation. The article was devastating. It included quotes from the Department of Education confirming the investigation. It referenced Title VI violations. It mentioned federal funding at risk. And most damning of all, it included a photograph, not from the investigation itself, but from Westbridge's own website, a glossy promotional shot of the cafeteria during lunch period that some marketing genius had apparently thought showcased their beautiful facilities, but that now, viewed through the lens of the investigation, showed exactly what the federal team had documented. Bright center tables packed with white students, dark corner tables with students of color pushed to the margins. The segregation was right there in their own publicity materials, and they'd been too blind to see it. The reporter had done her homework. She'd tracked down 3 families who'd left Westbridge in previous years citing discrimination. She'd pulled public records showing the school's federal funding, $2.4 million over the past 5 years. She'd gotten a quote from a civil rights attorney calling the documented patterns Jim Crow with a trust fund, and buried in the 14th paragraph was a detail that made Elliot's phone start ringing before 7 a.m. The investigation had been triggered by a complaint from a Department of Education official whose daughter attended the school. The reporter hadn't named Elliot or Kiara, but it didn't matter. Every family at Westbridge could do the math. Only one parent had caused a scene in the cafeteria last Friday. Only one student's father had been escorted off campus. The connection was obvious. By the time Kiara's alarm went off at 7:15, her phone had 37 unread messages. Most were from classmates she barely knew, variations on the same theme. Is this about you? Did your dad really call the feds? My parents are freaking out. You're going to get the school shut down. Why would you do this to us? She deleted the messages without responding and went downstairs to find Shanice already dressed for battle in her most intimidating courtroom suit, phone pressed to her ear, pacing the kitchen like a lawyer preparing for trial. I don't care what the other parents are saying, Shanice said into the phone, her voice ice cold. If anyone retaliates against my daughter, if anyone so much as looks at her wrong, I will add their names to the lawsuit I'm preparing, and they will personally discover what it costs to violate federal anti-retaliation statutes. Are we clear? She paused, listening. Good. I want that message delivered to every family on your board. Every single one. And I want it delivered today. She ended the call and looked at Kiara. That was Westbridge's attorney. Apparently some parents are organizing a petition demanding that you be expelled for damaging the school's reputation. Kiara's stomach dropped. Mom, it's not happening, Shanice said firmly. I've already informed them that any attempt to remove you will result in immediate legal action and public exposure that will make today's article look like a love letter. They're backing down. But baby, I need you to understand something. Today is going to be hard. People are angry, and they're going to direct that anger at you because it's easier than admitting their precious school is built on discrimination. Maybe I shouldn't go, Kiara said quietly. Maybe you shouldn't, Shanice agreed. And if you want to stay home, I will call the school right now and tell them you're taking a personal day, and they can go to hell if they have a problem with it. But if you want to go, if you want to walk into that building and show them they didn't break you, then I will drive you there myself, and I will park in that lot until school ends just to make sure you're safe. Your choice, baby. No judgment either way. Kiara thought about the corner table where she'd spent 4 months disappearing. She thought about Madison Turner and the other students who'd made it clear she didn't belong. She thought about Principal Kessler walking past her like she was invisible. She thought about her father finally seeing her, finally fighting for her, finally refusing to let her be erased. I want to go, she said. Shanice's eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. Okay then. Let's go show them what Brooks women are made of. The parking lot at Westbridge was chaos. News vans had set up on the public street outside the gates, cameras pointed at the entrance. Parents clustered in tight groups, their faces ranging from worried to furious. Security guards who normally waved families through were checking IDs and turning away reporters trying to sneak onto campus disguised as parents. Shanice pulled up to the drop-off circle in her BMW like she owned the place, stepped out in her 4-inch heels, and walked around to open Kiara's door personally. Several parents stared. A few whispered. One mother Shanice vaguely recognized from a fundraiser last year actually approached them. Mrs. Brooks, the woman said, her smile tight and fake. I'm sure you've seen the news this morning. Several of us are very concerned about the impact this investigation is having on our children's education. We were hoping you might consider helping to resolve this situation quickly and quietly for everyone's benefit. Shanice looked at her with the expression she used on opposing counsel who'd made a critical error in court. I'm concerned about the impact of systematic racism on my daughter's education. When you become equally concerned about that, we can talk. Until then, excuse us. She took Kiara's hand and walked toward the entrance, ignoring the woman's sputtered response. Inside, the hallways felt like a war zone. Students clustered in groups, their voices low and urgent. Teachers stood by their classroom doors looking exhausted and anxious. The morning announcements were strained, Principal Kessler's voice carefully neutral, as he reminded everyone that outside distractions should not interfere with our commitment to academic excellence, and that rumors and speculation are not helpful to our community. Kiara walked to her locker with her head down, hyper-aware of every glance, every whisper, every conversation that stopped when she approached. She could feel the weight of their anger and their fear and their judgment pressing down on her like physical force. At her locker, she found a note shoved through the vents. She unfolded it with shaking hands. Go back where you came from. Nobody wants you here. She crumpled it quickly, shoving it deep in her bag before anyone could see, but her hands were trembling and her vision was blurring with tears she refused to shed in this hallway. "Hey!" She turned to find Marcus Chen standing there, one of the few Asian students in her grade, quiet and kind, someone she'd exchanged maybe 10 words with all year. "I saw the article," Marcus said. "My parents did too. They said what's happening here is messed up, and they're glad someone finally said something." Kiara blinked at him. "Really?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "I mean, my family didn't complain because we didn't want to cause problems, but I eat lunch at those corner tables too. I know what it's like, and I just wanted to say that not everyone thinks you're the bad guy here." It was such a small thing, one kind word in an ocean of hostility, but it hit Kiara like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus nodded and walked away, and Kiara took a shaky breath and headed to first period. The day was brutal. In English, her teacher assigned group work, and no one wanted to be in Kiara's group until the teacher forced 3 students to join her, and they completed the entire assignment without speaking to her directly. In math, someone had written "snitch" on her desk in pencil, faint enough that she could pretend not to see it, but clear enough that she knew it was intentional. In science, the teacher called on her exactly once, and then ignored her raised hand for the rest of the period. But lunch was where everything erupted. Kiara walked into the cafeteria with her heart hammering, expecting the same corner table, the same silent marginalization, the same invisible walls. Instead, she found something different. The federal investigators were gone. Their on-site work apparently complete, but their impact remained. A large sign had been posted by the entrance. "All students are welcome to sit anywhere in the cafeteria. Seating is available on a first-come, first-served basis. No tables are reserved." It was such a small change, just words on a poster, but it represented the first visible crack in the system that had governed this space for years. Kiara got her lunch and stood there holding her tray, looking at the center tables that had always been forbidden territory. They were full, like always. White students laughing and talking, sprawled in their chairs, completely at ease. Then she looked at the corner table where she'd sat for 4 months. It was empty. The other students who usually sat there were scattered throughout the cafeteria, some still in the corners by habit, some trying tentatively to claim space elsewhere, all of them navigating new territory without a map. Kiara took a breath and walked toward one of the center tables. Not the most popular one, not the table where Madison and her friends held court, but a table near the windows where a group of students from her grade sat. There was one empty chair. She stood next to it, her tray clutched in her hands, her heart beating so fast she thought everyone could hear it. "Can I sit here?" she asked quietly. The table went silent. 5 students stared at her. She recognized most of them. Rachel from biology, Connor from history, Emma who played violin in orchestra, 2 others whose names she didn't know. "Actually, someone's sitting there," Rachel said, her voice not quite apologetic. "I don't see anyone," Kiara said, finding some reserve of courage she didn't know she had. "They're in the lunch line," Connor said quickly. Kiara looked at the lunch line. It was empty. Everyone already had their food. "Right," she said quietly. "Sorry." She started to turn away when a voice cut through the tension. "That's such bullshit." Everyone turned to look at Emma, who'd put down her fork and was staring at Rachel and Connor with disgust. "Seriously?" Emma continued. "You're really going to lie to her face about a seat that's clearly empty?" "Emma," Rachel started. "No," Emma said, standing up. "I'm done with this. We all know what's happening here. We all know why the feds showed up. And we can either keep pretending this place isn't completely screwed up, or we can actually try to be decent human beings." She looked at Kiara. "Sit down. If they don't want to share a table with you, they can leave." For a moment, nobody moved. The entire cafeteria had gone quiet, watching this confrontation unfold. Then Rachel grabbed her tray and stood. "Fine. I will." She walked away and Connor followed her, leaving Emma, Kiara, and the 2 other students at the table. Emma sat back down. "Sit," she said to Kiara, nodding at the now vacant chair. Kiara sat, her hands still shaking, her eyes burning with tears she was fighting to control. "I'm Emma," the girl said, as if they hadn't been in the same school for months. And I'm sorry it took federal investigators showing up for anyone to say anything. That's pathetic. It's okay, Kiara said automatically. It's not, Emma said. But maybe it will be. She took a bite of her salad. So what's the truth about your dad? Is he really some big deal at the Department of Education? Kiara nodded, not trusting her voice. That's kind of badass, Emma said. My dad's an accountant. Yours brings down discriminatory institutions. I'd say you win. One of the other students, a quiet boy named James, spoke up. My mom said her firm is going to lose the Westbridge account because of the investigation. She's pissed. At Westbridge or at Kiara? Emma asked pointedly. James hesitated. Both, I think, but mostly at the school for being stupid enough to get caught. Good, Emma said. They should be pissed at the school. None of this is Kiara's fault. But across the cafeteria, not everyone agreed. At Madison's table, phones were out, group chats were lighting up, and a plan was forming that would make the afternoon significantly worse than the morning. The confrontation came in the hallway between 6th and 7th period. Kiara was walking to her locker when she found herself surrounded by Madison and 5 other girls, all of them wealthy, all of them white, all of them furious. You need to fix this, Madison said without preamble. Fix what? Kiara asked, trying to keep her voice steady. This whole thing, Madison said, gesturing vaguely. The investigation, the articles, the reporters outside, all of it. You need to tell them it was a mistake, that you misunderstood, that everything's fine. Kiara stared at her. It wasn't a mistake, and everything's not fine. Yes, it is, Madison insisted. This school is fine. We're not racist. We have diversity initiatives and scholarships and everything. You're just mad because you couldn't handle the academic pressure, and now you're trying to blame the school instead of taking responsibility. Academic pressure? Kiara repeated, her voice rising. I have a 4.0 GPA. I'm not struggling academically. I'm struggling because you and everyone like you made it very clear that I don't belong here and never will. That's not true, Madison said, but her voice wavered. You told me the seats were saved, Kiara said. First day of school, I tried to sit with you and you looked at me like I was contaminating your table. Do you remember that? Madison's face flushed. I didn't mean, yes you did, Kiara said. You meant exactly what you said, and you've been meaning it every day since. The only difference now is that someone finally noticed, and you can't pretend it didn't happen. One of Madison's friends stepped forward, her face twisted with anger. You're ruining everything. My parents are talking about pulling me out of Westbridge because they don't want the discrimination investigation on my transcript. Do you understand that? You're destroying our futures because you're too sensitive to deal with normal school dynamics. Normal, Kiara repeated, and she laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that surprised even her. You think it's normal that every Black and Latino kid in this school eats lunch in the same corner? You think it's normal that we get dress-coded for things you wear every day? You think it's normal that teachers ignore us and guidance counselors try to push us toward lower-level classes even when we qualify for AP? That's not normal. That's discrimination. And the only reason you think it's normal is because you've never had to experience it. We're not discriminating against you, Madison said desperately. We have standards here, expectations. And if you can't meet them, I meet them, Kiara said, her voice steady now, strong in a way it hadn't been all year. I exceed them. But you don't care because to you, I'll never be good enough. I'll always be the diversity admit, the scholarship case, the girl who doesn't belong. And when someone finally calls that what it is, racism, you act like I'm the one causing problems. Don't call us racist, one of the other girls said, her voice shaking with rage or fear, or both. That's not fair. What's not fair, Kiara said, is spending 4 months eating lunch in a corner because I was too afraid to sit anywhere else. What's not fair is getting shoved out of seats and ignored in class and made to feel like I should be grateful you're even tolerating my presence. What's not fair is that it took my father showing up and federal investigators arriving before anyone in this school treated me like I deserved basic human dignity. She pushed past them, her heart racing, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and fear, and something else, something that felt almost like power. Madison called after her. My parents' lawyer says we can sue you for defamation. Kiara turned back. My mom's a civil rights attorney who's currently building a class action lawsuit against this school. Tell your parents' lawyer to call her. She'd love the conversation. She walked away before anyone could respond, made it to the bathroom, locked herself in a stall, and finally let herself cry. Not from sadness this time, but from the overwhelming relief of finally saying everything she'd been holding inside for months. By the end of the day, the confrontation had spread through the entire school. Half the students thought Kiara was a hero for standing up to Madison. The other half thought she was destroying Westbridge's reputation for personal attention. Teachers were caught in the middle, afraid to take sides, quietly hoping the whole thing would blow over before they had to actually confront the systems they'd participated in for years. When Shanice picked up Kiara that afternoon, she took one look at her daughter's face and knew it had been bad. "Tell me," she said as they drove away from campus. Kiara told her everything: the note in her locker, the empty seat that wasn't really empty, Emma's unexpected kindness, the confrontation with Madison, and the threat of a defamation lawsuit. Shanice listened in silence until Kiara finished, and then she pulled into a parking lot, put the car in park, and turned to face her daughter. "I'm going to tell you something that's going to sound harsh," Shanice said, "but I need you to hear it. Those girls who confronted you, they're not angry at you. They're terrified, because for the first time in their lives, they're facing consequences for behavior they've been taught is acceptable. They're realizing that their parents' money and their last names and their connections can't protect them from accountability, and that's scary for them. So they're lashing out at you because you're an easier target than the truth." "It doesn't feel like they're scared," Kiara said. "It feels like they hate me." "They might," Shanice said, "but that's not your problem. Your problem, and by problem I mean your only job right now, is to keep telling the truth and let the adults handle the consequences. You don't have to defend yourself to Madison or anyone else. You don't have to convince them you're not lying. You don't have to make them understand. You just have to survive until the system catches up with what you already know." "What if it doesn't catch up?" Kiara asked. "It will," Shanice said, "because your father and I are making damn sure it does." That evening, Westbridge's Board of Trustees held an emergency meeting. Principal Kessler presented his case for fighting the federal investigation, arguing that compliance would be an admission of guilt that would destroy the school's reputation. His argument lasted 11 minutes before the board's attorney cut him off with a simple statement that changed everything. "If we contest these findings, we lose our federal funding immediately," the attorney said. "That's $2.4 million annually. It's the difference between staying solvent and shutting down. More importantly, if we fight and lose, which we will because the evidence is overwhelming, we open ourselves to massive civil liability. The families affected by these discriminatory practices can sue for damages. We're talking tens of millions in potential exposure, maybe more if this becomes a class action." The board chair, a silver-haired venture capitalist named Gregory Thornton, looked at Kessler with cold calculation. "How many families are we talking about?" Thornton asked. "Potentially every student of color who's attended Westbridge in the past 10 years, the attorney said. If they can demonstrate a pattern of discrimination that affected their educational experience, they have grounds to sue." Thornton did the math quickly. His expression darkened. "And if we enter into a compliance agreement? We admit no wrongdoing, we commit to specific reforms, we allow federal monitoring for 3 years, and we significantly reduce our liability exposure. The families still might sue, but we have much better defenses if we can show we've taken corrective action." "What kind of reforms?" another board member asked. The attorney pulled out Patricia Moreno's proposal and read the highlights. "Mandatory anti-bias training for all staff. Transparent discipline policies with data reporting. Elimination of any practices that create de facto segregation. Regular climate surveys, external monitoring, public accountability reports." "This is insane," Kessler said. "This will fundamentally change who we are as an institution." "Good," said Dr. Sarah Chen, one of the few board members of color, speaking for the first time. "Because who we are right now is a school under federal investigation for civil rights violations. I'd say that needs to change." The room went quiet. "I've served on this board for 6 years," Dr. Chen continued, her voice tight with controlled anger. "In that time, I've raised concerns about our diversity numbers, our discipline disparities, our retention rates for students of color. Every time I was told we were doing our best, that these things take time, that we have initiatives in place. Meanwhile, we've created an environment so hostile that a 12-year-old girl spent months eating lunch in a corner because she didn't feel safe sitting anywhere else. And we didn't notice. Or worse, we noticed and didn't care. She looked directly at Kessler. The federal investigation isn't the problem, Howard. We are. And either we fix it voluntarily or we get fixed involuntarily. But one way or another, this changes. The vote was 8-2 in favor of accepting the compliance agreement. Kessler walked out of that meeting knowing his career at Westbridge was over. The board hadn't said it explicitly, but he'd sat through enough meetings to read the subtext. He'd become a liability, a symbol of everything they needed to distance themselves from. They'd let him stay through the compliance process to avoid the optics of firing him immediately, but the moment federal monitoring ended, he'd be quietly pushed into retirement with a severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. He'd spent 30 years building his reputation, and it had taken one parent with a cell phone camera exactly 6 hours to destroy it completely. The next morning, Westbridge issued a statement that made national news. The school acknowledged the federal investigation, committed to full cooperation, and announced immediate policy changes including the elimination of reserved seating in common areas, comprehensive anti-bias training for all staff, and the creation of an anonymous reporting system for discrimination complaints. The statement was carefully worded to avoid admitting liability while making it clear that changes were coming. Some families cheered. Others quietly began researching other schools. And in homes across Northern Virginia, parents had uncomfortable conversations with their children about privilege and prejudice and the difference between being nice and being just. At the Department of Education, Patricia Moreno added Westbridge to her growing list of successful interventions and moved on to the next investigation, confident that the monitoring team would ensure compliance. She'd seen enough of these cases to know that real change would be slow, painful, and incomplete, but at least it would be change. And in Elliot's apartment, Kiara sat at the kitchen table finishing her homework while her father cooked dinner, actually cooked, not ordered takeout. And for the first time in months, she felt like maybe, possibly, things might actually get better. "Dad?" she said, looking up from her math textbook. "Yeah, baby girl?" "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me, for not letting it go, for making them pay attention." Elliot set down the spatula and came to sit across from her, his eyes bright with emotion he didn't try to hide. "You shouldn't have to thank me for that," he said. "That's my job. And I'm sorry it took me so long to do it." "You're doing it now," Kiara said. "That's what matters." Later that night, after Kiara had gone to bed, Elliot stood on his balcony and called Shanice. "The board accepted the compliance agreement," he told her. "I heard," Shanice said. "My contact at the school called me this afternoon. They're also discussing Kessler's future. Sounds like he'll be gone within a year." "Good," Elliot said. "What about the lawsuit?" "Still moving forward," Shanice said. "I've got 4 other families interested in joining. We're building a strong case for systematic discrimination with documented harm. Even with the compliance agreement, they're still liable for past conduct." "How's Kiara handling all this?" Elliot asked. "Better than I expected," Shanice said. "She's tough. Gets that from me." Elliot laughed softly. "She gets her stubbornness from both of us." They were quiet for a moment, 2 people who'd failed at marriage but were finally succeeding at the only thing that mattered, protecting their daughter. "We make a good team," Shanice said finally, "when we actually work together." "Yeah," Elliot agreed. "We do." "Don't screw it up this time," Shanice said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "I won't," Elliot promised. "I'm done choosing everything else over her." And this time, he meant it. 3 weeks after the compliance agreement was signed, Westbridge Academy held its first all-school assembly on equity and inclusion. The gym was packed with students, teachers, administrators, and a handful of federal monitors who sat in the back, taking notes on clipboards that made everyone nervous. Principal Kessler stood at the podium looking like a man who'd aged 5 years in a month. His voice was steady but hollow as he read from prepared remarks that had been reviewed by the board's attorney, the Department of Education, and probably a crisis management consultant. We gather today to acknowledge that Westbridge has not always lived up to our stated values of inclusion and respect for all students, he said. We have allowed practices and patterns to persist that made some members of our community feel unwelcome and marginalized. This was wrong. It was unacceptable. And it ends now. The words were right, but they landed with all the sincerity of a hostage reading demands. Students shifted in their seats. Teachers stared at the floor. The federal monitors kept writing. Kessler introduced Dr. Angela Morrison, a nationally recognized expert in educational equity who'd been hired to lead the mandatory training sessions. Dr. Morrison was a black woman in her 50s with silver-streaked locks and the presence of someone who'd spent decades confronting uncomfortable truths in institutions that didn't want to hear them. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I'm not here to make you feel good," she told the assembled students, her voice carrying to every corner of the gym. "I'm here to make you think, to make you see what you've been taught not to see, to make you question systems you've accepted as normal because you've never had to experience them from the other side." She clicked to the first slide of her presentation, a photograph of Westbridge's cafeteria, the one from the school's own website that had appeared in the Washington Post. The segregation was undeniable. "This is your school," Dr. Morrison said. "This is what you created, not intentionally, maybe, not with explicit rules written down anywhere, but through 1,000 small choices, 1,000 casual exclusions, 1,000 moments where you decided who belonged and who didn't. And the pattern that emerged is right here for everyone to see." The gym was silent. "Some of you are angry right now," Dr. Morrison continued. "You're thinking, I didn't do this, I'm not racist, I never told anyone where to sit. And you're right, you probably didn't. But you also didn't question it when it was happening. You didn't wonder why the cafeteria looked like two different schools occupying the same space. You didn't ask why your Black and Latino classmates always ended up in the corners while you sat in the center. You accepted it as normal because it didn't affect you." Kiara sat 3 rows from the back, wedged between Emma and Marcus Chen, both of whom had quietly become her allies over the past few weeks. She could feel eyes on her from all directions, some sympathetic, some resentful, some just curious about the girl at the center of the storm. Dr. Morrison's presentation lasted 45 minutes. She showed data on discipline disparities, academic tracking, extracurricular participation rates, all of it broken down by race, and all of it painting the same picture. Westbridge had created a 2-tier system disguised as meritocracy, where white students received opportunities and second chances, while students of color received scrutiny and barriers. The Q&A section was explosive. A white senior raised his hand and asked, "But what if the disparities are just because of different choices? Like, if black students choose to sit together, isn't that their preference?" Dr. Morrison's smile was sharp. Choice requires freedom. When students consistently make the same choice to sit in the least desirable section of the cafeteria, we need to ask whether that's really a choice or a response to an environment that makes other options feel impossible. Research shows that marginalized students gravitate towards spaces where they feel safe from microaggressions, exclusion, and hostility. That's not preference. That's survival. Another student asked, "Why do we have to keep talking about race? Doesn't that just make divisions worse?" "Ignoring race doesn't make racism disappear," Dr. Morrison said. "It just makes it easier for the people who benefit from racist systems to pretend those systems don't exist. We talk about race because race affects how students are treated in this building every single day. If that makes you uncomfortable, good. Discomfort means you're finally paying attention." Madison Turner, sitting near the front with her friends, raised her hand. Her voice shook slightly when she spoke. "What if we didn't know we were doing anything wrong? What if we were just acting normal and didn't realize it was hurting people?" Dr. Morrison's expression softened slightly. "That's called unconscious bias, and everyone has it. The question isn't whether you have bias, you do. The question is what you do when someone points it out. Do you get defensive and deny it? Do you blame the person who noticed? Or do you stop, reflect, and commit to doing better? That's the choice you're facing right now." After the assembly, students filed out of the gym in clusters, some arguing loudly, some walking in uncomfortable silence, all of them processing something most had never been forced to confront before. Emma walked with Kiara toward their lockers. "That was intense." "Yeah, Kiara said quietly. Do you think it'll actually change anything? Emma asked. I don't know, Kiara admitted. But at least people are talking about it now. That's something. What Kiara didn't know was that while students were processing Dr. Morrison's presentation, parents were receiving an email from the school's board of trustees that would accelerate the transformation already underway. The email announced several major changes effective immediately. First, Mrs. Larchmont had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation into her role in maintaining discriminatory practices. The cafeteria would be supervised by a rotation of staff members who'd completed intensive anti-bias training, and all students would receive the same level of service and respect regardless of where they chose to sit. Second, the school's discipline policies were being completely overhauled. All infractions would now be documented in a centralized system with mandatory review by an equity committee before any suspension or expulsion was issued. Data would be published quarterly showing discipline rates disaggregated by race, and any disparities would trigger automatic investigation. Third, academic tracking and AP course placement would be reformed. The current system, which relied heavily on teacher recommendations that had proven to be racially biased, would be replaced with transparent criteria based on test scores and grades. Any student who met the criteria would be automatically enrolled unless they chose to opt out. Fourth, the school was establishing a student equity council with real power to review policies, investigate complaints, and make recommendations directly to the board. Half the council members would be students of color, and their meetings would be open to anyone who wanted to observe. And fifth, Principal Kessler would be retiring at the end of the academic year. The announcement framed it as a planned transition, but everyone understood what it really meant. Kessler was being forced out, and his replacement would be someone committed to the reforms he'd spent 3 decades resisting. The parent response was predictably divided. Some families applauded the changes and pledged their support. Others withdrew their students immediately, unwilling to have their children attend a school obsessed with political correctness. A few threatened legal action, claiming the reforms discriminated against white students, threats that went nowhere when their attorneys explained that ensuring equal treatment isn't discrimination, and that any lawsuit would likely trigger discovery revealing even more damaging evidence. By mid-November, Westbridge had lost 12% of its enrollment, but applications from families of color had tripled, and the school's waiting list suddenly looked far more diverse than it had in decades. The class action lawsuit that Shanice had been building moved forward despite the compliance agreement. She'd recruited 9 families who'd documented years of discrimination at Westbridge, and their stories painted a devastating picture of systematic exclusion, hostile treatment, and educational harm. The school's insurance company pushed hard for settlement, and after weeks of negotiation, an agreement was reached. Westbridge would pay $3 million in compensatory damages to be distributed among the affected families. The school would issue a formal public apology acknowledging the harm caused by discriminatory practices. And most importantly, the settlement agreement included provisions for ongoing monitoring that went beyond the federal compliance requirements, creating a permanent framework for accountability that couldn't be quietly dismantled once the spotlight faded. The day the settlement was announced, Shanice took Kiara to lunch at the deli, where Elliot had bought the birthday sandwich that started everything. "You know what this means, right?" Shanice said, watching her daughter eat the same turkey and avocado combination her father had ordered. "What?" Kiara asked. "It means you won," Shanice said. "You and your dad and every other kid who was brave enough to tell the truth. You beat a system that was designed to make you feel powerless, and you forced it to change." "It doesn't feel like winning," Kiara said quietly. "It just feels like things are finally the way they should have been all along." Shanice reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "That's exactly what winning looks like, baby. Not some big dramatic moment. Just the hard, slow work of making the world a little bit more fair." By December, the changes at Westbridge were visible to anyone paying attention. The cafeteria had been completely reorganized. The old premium section was gone, replaced by a system where all students had equal access to the salad bar and hot food stations. The corner tables had been moved to better locations with natural light and charging stations. And most importantly, students were starting to sit in genuinely integrated groups, instead of the rigid racial divisions that had defined the space for years. It wasn't perfect. Some students still self-segregated by choice, and that was fine. People have the right to sit with friends who share their background and experiences. But the key difference was that it was actually a choice now, not a requirement enforced by invisible rules and social pressure. The academic changes were showing results too. 23 students of color had been enrolled in AP courses they'd been discouraged from taking previously, and their performance was proving that the only thing holding them back had been low expectations from adults who should have known better. Several had already been contacted by college recruiters, impressed by their transcripts and personal statements about overcoming discrimination. The discipline data told a similar story. Once the new oversight system was implemented, the disparities began to shrink dramatically. It turned out that when administrators had to justify every suspension with documentation and couldn't rely on subjective judgments about attitude and respect, they suddenly found ways to handle behavioral issues without resorting to exclusionary discipline. The Student Equity Council held its first meeting in early December with 17 members, and Kiara had been elected as one of the co-chairs. She'd been reluctant to take on the role. Visibility still made her nervous after months of being the target of anger and resentment. But Emma and Marcus had both insisted she was the right person for it. "You started this," Emma had told her. "You should help finish it." The council's first major initiative was reforming the dress code, which had been used for years to police students of color for wearing cultural hairstyles and clothing, while ignoring similar violations by white students. The new code eliminated all subjective language about distraction and professionalism and focused solely on health and safety. Hoodies were now allowed. Head wraps were explicitly protected. Natural hairstyles were celebrated instead of punished. It was such a small thing, but it mattered enormously to students who'd spent years being told their bodies and hair were inherently inappropriate for educational spaces. In January, the school hosted its first equity showcase where students presented research projects on topics like the school-to-prison pipeline, housing discrimination, and environmental racism. The gym was packed with students, parents, and community members, and the presentations were so powerful that several parents were in tears by the end. Kiara's project focused on cafeteria segregation in American schools, using Westbridge as a case study. She'd interviewed students, analyzed data, and created a documentary-style video featuring the original footage her father had taken, combined with new interviews showing how things had changed. When she showed the before and after comparison, the old segregated cafeteria versus the current integrated space, the audience erupted in applause. Afterward, a woman approached her. She introduced herself as Dr. Chen, the board member who'd spoken up during the meeting that had forced Kessler's retirement. "I want to apologize to you personally," Dr. Chen said. "I served on this board for years and I saw the problems, but I didn't push hard enough to fix them. I told myself I was doing what I could, but the truth is I was protecting my own position instead of protecting students like you. I'm sorry it took a federal investigation to make me find my courage." Kiara didn't know what to say. She'd never had an adult apologize to her like this, not making excuses, not deflecting blame, just owning their failure and acknowledging the harm it caused. "Thank you," she finally managed, "for saying that, and for helping now." "We're going to keep helping," Dr. Chen promised. "This isn't a one-year fix. This is a fundamental change in who we are as an institution, and it's going to take years of sustained effort. But I promise you, we're committed to seeing it through." In February, Principal Kessler announced his retirement effective at the end of June. The board had already hired his replacement, Dr. James Rodriguez, a former public school principal who'd spent 15 years turning around struggling schools by focusing on equity, restorative justice, and culturally responsive teaching. He'd be starting in July to prepare for the fall semester, and he'd already made it clear that he had no interest in maintaining Westbridge's old traditions if those traditions meant excluding students. Kessler's farewell speech at the spring assembly was brief and perfunctory. He thanked the board for the opportunity to serve, acknowledged that the school was entering a new chapter, and wished everyone success. He didn't mention the investigation, he didn't apologize, he didn't take any real responsibility for the system he'd maintained and defended until the very end. But his silence spoke volumes, and students who'd lived through the transformation understood exactly what wasn't being said. Mrs. Larchmont never returned to Westbridge. The internal investigation had found extensive evidence of discriminatory conduct, and she'd been quietly terminated with a severance package contingent on her signing a non-disclosure agreement. The last Kiara heard, She was working at a country club in Maryland, far away from any environment where her behavior would be scrutinized by federal monitors. By spring, something remarkable had happened at Westbridge. The school had started to feel different, not perfect, nowhere is perfect, but fundamentally changed in ways that went beyond policy updates and compliance requirements. Students were forming friendships across racial lines that wouldn't have existed a year earlier. Teachers were questioning their own biases and seeking out professional development on culturally responsive pedagogy. The Equity Council had real influence and was using it to challenge policies and practices that perpetuated inequality. And most importantly, students of color were starting to feel like they actually belonged, instead of just being tolerated. Kiara noticed it in small moments. The way teachers called on her with genuine interest in her answers instead of perfunctory acknowledgement. The way her classmates invited her to study groups and birthday parties and weekend hangouts without it feeling like charity or obligation. The way she could walk through the halls without constantly monitoring herself, could laugh without worrying it was too loud, could take up space without feeling like she was committing an offense. She still had hard days. There were still students who resented her for ruining the school they'd loved. There were still moments of isolation and exclusion that reminded her how much work remained. But the difference was that those moments were no longer the norm. They were aberrations that could be challenged and addressed instead of accepted as inevitable. In April, Elliot attended his first school event since the cafeteria incident, the spring concert where Kiara was performing a solo piece on piano. He sat in the audience next to Shanice, both of them navigating the awkward territory of divorced parents who'd learned to co-parent effectively through crisis. When Kiara walked on stage, Elliot felt his chest tighten with pride and residual guilt. She looked confident, poised, happy in a way she hadn't been in months. She played beautifully, a classical piece she'd been practicing for weeks, her fingers moving across the keys with precision and emotion. The audience applauded enthusiastically when she finished, and Elliot saw something that made his eyes burn with tears. Students were cheering for her, not just polite applause, but genuine celebration. Emma and Marcus were on their feet whistling. Other students joined them. The recognition was real, and it was for her, not in spite of what had happened, but because of who she'd become through it. After the concert, families gathered in the lobby for refreshments. Elliot and Shanice stood with Kiara, forming a united front that felt both strange and right. Several parents approached them. Some offered congratulations on Kiara's performance. Others thanked them quietly for forcing the school to confront its failures. One father, a white man whose daughter had become friends with Kiara, shook Elliot's hand and said, "You did what a lot of us should have done years ago. Thank you for having the courage we didn't." Elliot didn't know how to respond to that, to the acknowledgement that other parents had seen the discrimination and chosen silence over solidarity. "Your daughter did the hard part," Elliot finally said. "All I did was pay attention when she needed me to." Dr. Chen approached them, accompanied by a tall black woman in her early 40s. "I wanted to introduce you to someone," Dr. Chen said. "This is Dr. Rodriguez, our new principal starting in the fall, sir." Rodriguez shook hands with all three of them, her grip firm and her eyes direct. "I've read the compliance agreement," she told Elliot. "I've reviewed the federal investigation findings. I've studied the lawsuit settlement, and I've spent the last month interviewing students and staff about what really happened here." She paused. "I want you to know that I'm not coming to Westbridge to preserve what was. I'm coming to build something better. And I'm going to need families like yours, families who aren't afraid to demand excellence and equity, to help me do it." "What do you need from us?" Shanice asked, always practical, always ready to strategize. "Accountability," Dr. Rodriguez said. "Keep watching. Keep questioning, keep demanding that we live up to our stated values instead of just putting them in brochures. The moment families like yours stop paying attention is the moment institutions like this slide back into old patterns." "We'll be watching," Shanice promised. "So will the federal monitors," Elliot added, "for at least 3 more years." "Good," Dr. Rodriguez said with a slight smile. "Because I don't want to run a school that only does the right thing when someone's watching. I want to build a culture where equity is the foundation, not an afterthought." Later that night, after Shanice had driven Kiara home, and Elliot was alone in his apartment, He stood on his balcony looking out at the DC skyline and thought about everything that had changed since that Friday in September when he'd walked into his daughter's cafeteria with a birthday lunch and finally saw what he should have seen months earlier. His phone rang. It was Marcus Webb. "I've got news," Marcus said. "The monitoring team submitted their 6-month report. Westbridge is in full compliance with all requirements. More than that, they're actually implementing reforms beyond what we mandated. This is becoming a model case." "That's good to hear," Elliot said. "It's more than good," Marcus said. "We're going to use Westbridge as an example in our training materials for other schools. This is what accountability looks like when it's done right. Not just punitive measures, but genuine transformation with community support." "How's Kiara handling everything?" Marcus asked. "She's good," Elliot said. "Better than good, actually. She's thriving. She's got friends, she's involved in school activities. She's not afraid to take up space anymore, and she knows that when she needs me, I'll be there." "You kept that promise," Marcus said. "A lot of parents don't." After hanging up, Elliot texted Kiara, "Proud of you, baby girl. Your performance tonight was beautiful. Love you." She responded almost immediately. "Love you too, Dad. Thanks for coming and for everything else." The following week, Kiara gave her final presentation to the Student Equity Council, summarizing everything they'd accomplished in their first year and outlining goals for the next. The list was ambitious, establishing a peer mediation program trained in restorative justice, creating mentorship opportunities between upperclassmen and incoming students of color, developing a curriculum review process to ensure diverse voices and perspectives across all subjects, and implementing regular climate surveys to track whether students actually felt safe and valued. "We've made progress," Kiara told the council. "But progress isn't the same as finished. There are still students who don't feel like they belong here. There are still teachers who don't understand why representation matters. There are still families who think equity work is a threat instead of a promise. Our job is to keep pushing, keep educating, keep demanding better until this school actually becomes what it claims to be, a place where every student can thrive." The council members applauded, and as Kiara looked around the room at the diverse group of students who'd volunteered to do this hard, often thankless work, she felt something shift inside her. This was no longer about her personal trauma or her father's intervention or the federal investigation that had turned her school upside down. This was about building something lasting, something that would protect students she'd never meet and prevent pain she'd never have to witness. On the last day of school, Westbridge held a closing ceremony in the gym. Dr. Rodriguez addressed the students for the first time, even though she wouldn't officially start until summer. She spoke about the school's history, its challenges, and its commitment to becoming better. "Change is uncomfortable," she said. "It requires us to question things we've accepted, to acknowledge harm we've caused, to commit to doing better even when it's hard. This school is in the middle of that process. Some of you have embraced it, some of you have resisted it, all of you have been changed by it. As you leave for summer break, I want you to think about what kind of community you want to be part of. Do you want a community that protects privilege at the expense of dignity? Or do you want a community that makes room for everyone? That's the choice you'll keep making every day, in big ways and small. Choose wisely." After the ceremony, students poured out of the gym into brilliant June sunshine, laughing and shouting and making summer plans. Kiara walked with Emma and Marcus and a handful of other students who'd become genuine friends over the tumultuous year. "So what are you doing this summer?" Emma asked. "My dad got us tickets to visit some colleges," Kiara said. "He wants me to start thinking about where I want to apply even though I'm only going into 8th grade. "That's so extra," Marcus said, laughing. "He's making up for lost time," Kiara said, and she meant it without bitterness. Her father had kept his promise. He'd been present, engaged, protective without being controlling. He'd shown up to every school event, responded to every text, made time for weekly dinners even when his work schedule was insane. He was rebuilding trust brick by brick, and Kiara was letting him. "What about you?" she asked Emma. "Summer camp," Emma said. "Leadership program focused on social justice. My parents signed me up after watching me become obsessed with equity work this year." She grinned. "I blame you for that, by the way." "You're welcome," Kiara said. They walked toward the parking lot where parents were waiting, and Kiara spotted her father's car. Elliot was leaning against it, scrolling through his phone, looking relaxed in jeans and a t-shirt instead of his usual suits. "That's my ride," Kiara said. "See you in August," Emma said, pulling her into a quick hug. Marcus waved. "Don't forget about us over the summer." "Never," Kiara promised. She walked to her father's car, threw her backpack in the back seat, and climbed in. "How was the last day?" Elliot asked. "Good," Kiara said. "Weird. Like, I know everything's different now, but it's also kind of the same, you know?" "I do know," Elliot said, starting the car. "Change is like that. You don't always notice it happening until you look back and realize how far you've come." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, then Kiara spoke again. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think it was worth it? All the stress and the investigation and the lawsuit and everything? Do you think Westbridge actually changed, or did they just get better at hiding the problems?" Elliot thought about it carefully before answering. "I think they changed. Not completely, not overnight, but genuinely. The systems are different now. The accountability is real. And most importantly, students like you don't have to eat lunch in corners anymore. Is that worth the stress?" "Yeah, baby. That's worth everything." Kiara nodded, satisfied with that answer. "Besides," Elliot continued, "you know what I learned from all this?" "What?" "That you're braver than I ever gave you credit for," he said. "You survived 4 months in an environment designed to break you, and when someone finally noticed, you didn't minimize it or make excuses for them. You told the truth. That takes incredible courage." "I was just tired of pretending I was fine," Kiara said. "That's what courage looks like," Elliot said. "Refusing to pretend anymore. Refusing to make yourself small so other people can stay comfortable. Demanding that the world make room for you instead of apologizing for existing." They pulled up to his apartment building and Kiara grabbed her backpack. "We're going to order pizza and watch terrible movies tonight," Elliot announced. "And tomorrow we're driving up to see your first college campus. And the rest of the summer, we're doing whatever you want. I cleared my schedule." "You cleared your whole summer schedule?" Kiara asked skeptically. "Every non-essential meeting, every optional trip, every networking event that wasn't absolutely mandatory. I told my team that my daughter and I are making up for lost time. And anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with the Secretary of Education." Kiara laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "You didn't actually say that." "I absolutely did," Elliot said. "And you know what? Nobody had a problem with it. Turns out when you prioritize your kid, people respect that." That summer, Elliot and Kiara visited 7 colleges. They toured campuses, sat in on classes, talked to students about their experiences. They had long conversations about what Kiara wanted from her education, what kind of community she wanted to be part of, what mattered to her beyond rankings and prestige. They also talked about what had happened at Westbridge, not dwelling on the trauma, but processing it, learning from it, understanding how systems of power and privilege work and how they can be challenged. And slowly, carefully, they rebuilt their relationship on a foundation of honesty and presence instead of promises and absences. By the time August arrived and it was time to return to Westbridge for 8th grade, Kiara felt different, stronger, more certain of her worth, more willing to take up space and demand to be seen. The first day of school, she walked into the cafeteria with Emma and Marcus, got her lunch, and sat at a table right in the center of the room. Not to prove a point, not to make a statement, just because that's where her friends were sitting and she belonged there as much as anyone else. Nobody questioned it. Nobody told her the seats were saved. Nobody looked at her like she was violating an unspoken rule. She just sat down, ate her lunch, laughed with her friends, and existed in space that was finally, actually, hers. And across town, in his office at the Department of Education, Elliot Brooks received a text from his daughter. A photo of her sitting at that center table, smiling genuinely, surrounded by friends who'd chosen to sit with her because they actually wanted to. The caption read, "Look how far we've come." Elliot stared at that photo for a long time, his eyes burning with tears he didn't bother to hide. And he thought about all the students across the country still eating lunch in corners, still making themselves small, still waiting for someone to notice and care enough to fight for them. He thought about the hundreds of schools he'd investigated over his career, the patterns he'd documented, the systems he'd tried to dismantle from his desk in Washington while his own daughter suffered in silence just miles away. And he made himself a promise. He would keep fighting those fights, keep pushing for equity and accountability, keep demanding that institutions live up to their stated values. But he would never again be so focused on the big picture that he missed the individual child right in front of him who needed him to show up. Because sometimes changing the system starts with seeing one person, believing one story, taking one stand that says, "Not here, not to my child, not on my watch." And sometimes that one stand is enough to crack open a foundation built on exclusion and force everyone to build something better in its place. Years later, when Kiara was in college studying education policy and social justice, she would look back on that year at Westbridge and understand it as the moment she learned that change is possible but never easy, that speaking truth requires courage, but silence requires complicity, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to disappear. She would think about the corner table where she'd eaten lunch for months, and about the center table where she eventually belonged, and about all the students who'd never get the chance to make that journey because no one was watching their cafeterias or questioning their schools or demanding that they be treated with the dignity every child deserves. And she would dedicate her life to making sure that more students got that chance, that more parents paid attention before it was too late, that more institutions were held accountable before federal investigators had to force their hand. Because her father had taught her something crucial. You don't have to accept the world as it is. You can demand that it be better. You can fight for that better world even when people tell you you're being dramatic or sensitive or divisive. You can refuse to eat lunch in the corner ever again. And when you do, you make it easier for the next person to refuse too, and the next, until one day there are no more corners, just communities where everyone actually belongs. That was the lesson Elliot and Kiara learned together, the hard way, through pain and persistence and the slow, difficult work of transformation. And it was a lesson worth learning, no matter what it cost.